I'm delighted to see all of you here today for the Western Service Area Authority's panel on employment options and education options for people with mental illness. I'm Alexandra Volkerts, and I'm an attorney with Disability Rights Montana, as well as an ex officio officer of the Western Service Area Authority. That basically means I don't get to vote.
But you have to do all the work.
But I still have to do the work. That's right. And this panel is near and dear to my heart. First of all, because I've worked with some of the people on the panel, and second of all, because I know we have brought together some of the most innovative people in Montana about how you make meaningful employment for people with disabilities, particularly with mental illness. And because we have some experts here in both government regulations and in the supports that are available to you if your goal is an education that will lead you to employment. So I think we're going to have a wonderful discussion. All three of the SAAs are committed to finding ways to help people towards recovery in our efforts to change the public mental health system. And the recovery principles need to be integrated into everything we do. People with mental illness are able to work and often very much want to work, but there are many barriers to their ability to work. The organizations and agencies represented here have been assisting people with mental illness find employment or obtain higher education leading to employment. I don't even want to guess at the combined number of years of experience sitting at this table. Recovery is a deeply personal journey, with side trips, detours, and oftentimes retracing of steps. But even though it's very personal, there are many elements of recovery that are common. The major divide in the definition of recovery is whether or not you're talking from a clinical perspective, in which case recovery means the cessation of an episode of illness, or you're talking to the consumer, survivor, advocate movement, in which recovery means recovering a full life, a meaningful life. The consumer survivor movement and a group of federal agencies came together to define recovery and agree on a definition. That definition in part has been driven by the World Health Organization studies in 1970 and in the early 1990s, which came to a very surprising conclusion. The World Health Organization initially studied people with schizophrenia in a number of countries. They looked at first world countries like the United States and Europe, and they looked at third world countries like Tanzania and India. The outstanding and surprising result of their study is that people in third world countries recovered at almost twice the rate of people in first world countries. They were so astounded by this outcome that they turned around and did the study again because they didn't believe it. And the second study showed exactly the same thing. People with mental illness, severe disabling mental illness, recovered better in countries where social supports were extremely strong, people were not shipped off to institutions, and medication was not the primary way of dealing with mental illness. These are the very foundations of what we know about recovery and what we have been pushing for recovery in this country. Recovery means a secure base, including appropriate housing, sufficient income, freedom from violence, and adequate access to health care. It means a durable sense of self that allows someone to move towards the relationships and the nurturing while developing one's own interests, spirituality, and identity. It means supportive relationships that are not based on paid professionals, the kinds of relationships that come from family, friends, peers, and community. It means empowerment and inclusion, control of one's life, choices, one's self-determination in designing and implementing the supports and services we need to survive. And it means developing coping strategies that help bridge the gap between our own reality and community's reality. Strategies to include self-help, self-management, medication, psychotherapy, problem-solving skills, and becoming one's own expert about one's own illness. And finally, it means finding meaning in our lives, meaning through work, school, community activities, renewing our religious connections, our philosophical beliefs, our politics, and our culture. In our culture, we define ourselves most frequently by what we do, and it is usually one of the first 5 questions anyone is asked: what do you do? Work also motivates us to leave our house, expand our interests, increase our social connections, challenge our minds, increase our problem-solving skills, and secure an economic basis. Work impacts almost every area of recovery that we've identified: relationships, financial security, meaning, connection, inclusion. Being able to work is oftentimes a shorthand definition for recovery. Today, we will look at the obstacles to people with mental illness finding work and retaining work, and we will look at creative ways to overcome those obstacles so that people with mental illness can be fully integrated into the community. I'm going to briefly introduce our panel, and then I will let them introduce themselves a little bit more. First, we have Stacy Wheeler from Winds of Change. Stacy, do you want to say something?
Sure. So I've been working at Winds of Change, and we provide mental health services to adults only. We don't serve children currently, and we are in the process of getting an employment and education program up and going with the recovery grant that we received.
Thank you. Next, we have Dan Burke, who's Assistant Director for Disability Services for Students at the University of Montana.
Good afternoon. I'll just say that yes, students with mental illnesses are at the U of M, and we serve those at least who come to our office and identify themselves. And I'll talk more about that later. Thanks.
Okay. Next, we have Sarah Weber from Workers Now in Butte, and she will introduce her two co-panelists.
Hi everyone, I'm Sarah Weber with Workers Now. Workers Now is a hands-on vocational program through Western Montana Mental Health Center. I brought with me today Mark and Scott and Tammy. She's in the audience here. So, go ahead.
I'm Mark Kness, and I'm a coach support specialist for Workers Now. And what I do is I take workers out with mental illnesses and train them and supervise over them and help them build their self-esteem and give them some skills that they can use for future use for becoming independent on their own.
My name's Scott, and I also am a peer support specialist. I'd like to say it's an honor to be here today. It's an honor to get to work with these kids and young men and older men, some of them older than I. And that's a miracle. It's quite a challenge some days, and some days it's quite comical, you know. No day is the same, you know. Every day is different. There's good days, bad days, and I'm sure you're all aware of what I'm talking about. It's just a true honor to be able to work with them, and we'd like to expand our services to give them a little bit more training. At a particular time, we don't have that resource, but we're working on it.
Thank you. Connie Bauer is coordinator of vocational programs with with Western Montana Mental Health Center and with the Missoula County Workers Now program.
Yes, I have worked for a number of years with Missoula County Adult Mental Health Services, providing vocational services with primary funding through vocational rehabilitation, the VA vocational rehabilitation, and some supports through the financial supports through both Medicaid and the Mental Health Services Plan. We received a recovery grant this past fall, and we have started a Workers Now Missoula program. It's in the third month of going, and so I can talk a little bit more about that a little bit later. In addition to providing those services, I do a lot of benefits analysis with clients to do the do no harm theory related to benefits. And so that's a strong and very primary focus. And my training is in occupational therapy, so I'm often asked to do an assessment of functional cognition, not intelligence, but more how people can use their skills, addressing what's the best type of work setting, what strengths people have, what are the disability issues, and make reasonable accommodations and to help facilitate that.
Thank you. Next, we have Brooke Hodge from Vocational Rehabilitation Services.
Hi, I'm Brooke, and I have worked at Voc Rehab for 5 years, and I'm currently a member of our local advisory council here in Missoula. And what I'm going to do today is talk about the Voc Rehab program and answer any questions that you might have. And then I'm also going to talk about what Voc Rehab is doing on a state level and then also here on a local level here in Missoula to work with folks with mental illness. And then I also want to talk about supported employment as well.
Thank you. Next, we have Lori Idland from Disability Rights Montana. She is our PAB specialist, which means she's the person who works with helping people utilize the Social Security Ticket to Work and work incentives.
I'm Alexis's co-worker, and also the work group that I'm in specializes in employment issues, employment discrimination, access issues, which includes physical access, and also disputes with vocational rehabilitation.
Thank you. And then we have Carrie Griffin, Griffin Hammis Associates. Griffin Hammis Associates specializes in developing customized employment and working with large-scale systems to make them more responsive to employment issues.
So, what you said. We have 6 offices around the United States, and we do a lot of work with VR agencies. We do a lot of work around training the people who do the Social Security work. And then we spend most of our time working on sort of the next iteration of supported employment, which is customized employment, which I'll talk about more later. And we're probably best known for incubating small businesses for folks, having started about 500 businesses around the country now. So about 30% of those are owned by people with psychiatric disabilities.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. I want to thank all the panelists for being here today. And now that we've had an opportunity to introduce everyone, I wanted to switch over to the questions. Carrie Griffin has kindly offered, he wasn't quite sure he had done this, but he has kindly offered to talk a little bit about the background of employment issues and unemployment of people with mental illness.
Well, yeah, you sent us some rather pointed questions, and since I'm not the authority on data, I'll tell you what I know.
Okay, that sounds good.
What Alexis asked us to do was to talk about the percentage of folks who want employment, and again, it depends on whose numbers you're looking at. Some of the more standard quality of life questionnaires that go out around the country pretty typically reveal about 90% of folks who carry a diagnosis, some diagnosis, request work. Around education or higher education, the numbers are a real moving target. We don't actually know, or I certainly don't know what that is. We do know that about 25 to 50% of folks who carry a diagnosis have some exposure to higher ed, because average onset's about 22 years old in this country. So, but we do know that again, when you ask somebody, would you like a college education, almost everybody says yes. It's like asking somebody if you'd like to win the lottery. It's a tough question to kind of track, but we do know that folks want that. There was a little bit of question about unemployment numbers nationally. And again, it depends on whose numbers you use. We work with Purdue, with Gary Bond occasionally out of Purdue. We work with Judith Cook out of Chicago, the guys at Dartmouth, and we follow their data. And again, it's, you know, the employment rate for people with a severe psychiatric diagnosis runs from, you know, the employment rate runs from 20 to 17% is sort of the variations that I've seen. So it's very, very low. Compared to, let's say, folks with developmental disabilities, which is actually a little bit more accurate because the system collects data a little bit more carefully. People with developmental disabilities are employed at a rate today of about 22%. So actually the numbers are lower for folks with psychiatric disabilities. And what else did you want to know? Was that enough data for you?
I think so. We'll have time for questions, so I wanted.
We had a question.
Did you have a question,
okay?
Tom?
Are you saying major mental health
Yes.
issues? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I was going to ask Brooke if she could bring that to more specificity about Montana.
And one of the handouts that everyone should have got is the 2009 report to the governor. And this is a document that's put together by our Voc Rehab Council. And the council is made up of a lot of different folks throughout Montana, professionals, consumers, etc. And Dan, are you on the
Yes, I
VR
am.
Council? So you might be able to talk more about this as well. But if you turn to page 3, you'll see a breakdown of the 2009 Voc Rehab stats at a glance. And you'll see that 51% of the consumers applying for and receiving Voc Rehab services have a psychological or mental disability, which obviously is over half. And you can look there then at the average hourly wage of placements by year and the number of VR placements by year. And our staff were talking yesterday about these statistics, and of course thrilled to see that that hourly wage has continued to go up, but the number of placements has gone down. And we all agree that the current state of the economy is what has caused that to drop quite significantly compared to the previous years. So, does anybody have any questions about that or any comments?
Okay, then I'm going to ask Dan if he could contribute a little bit of information about the number of students at the universities that are
Okay.
facing.
University of Montana, we serve somewhere around 1,100 students with disabilities. And that's based on how students with disabilities of all kinds, that's based on their self-identification. So in that group, maybe 50 to 60, maybe it's getting up to 70 now, I don't know, are probably students that are identified with significant, mental illnesses. And again, that seems like a really small number, but I also know that those are only the students that self-identify, and that number has probably tripled, if not more, in the last 10 to 15 years. And nobody really knows why, except that people, I think, are identifying themselves more often. What I do believe, we all believe, is that there are a lot of students that don't identify themselves. Actually, periodically, we had at least 2 or 3 students that have worked for us, were not identified as having a mental illness or any kind of disability, but disclosed, just in the course of work, to me anyway, that they had a major mental illness. They just didn't disclose. So why they were attracted to us is kind of curious or interesting, but I don't know. So what I guess the point I'm making is that we identify a small number. That number has increased dramatically in terms of percentages, but also we know that there are more out there, and oftentimes they don't come to our offices until there's some kind of urgency to do so.
I think all of us who work in any type of services or work with people with mental illness have met people with mental illness who very much want to work. The real challenges we have seen is that many people who want to work are not working. And there are lots of reasons and barriers for this. So I'd like to talk a little bit now, and I'm going to throw open to the panel what they see as the major obstacles to employment of people with mental illness. And I'd like to start with Carrie.
Boy, I don't know how much time we got. You know, it depends on who you talk to. In the literature, and having done some work with Samson and some other folks, they talk a lot about the fact that stigma and discrimination are the major issues. And I would put fear of loss of benefits and other things right up there at the top. And why the information doesn't get out about benefits, I'm not sure, but there's been, you know, major changes in the Social Security Act over the years, but the folklore is pretty strong about loss of benefits. Pretty hard to lose Medicaid these days. You'd have to make, what, 30 grand in Montana, and then you can negotiate an individual rate if you happen to have high Medicaid usage, but people don't know this, and case management and service coordinators don't know these things. There's a very interesting benefit in the Social Security Act that came in with the 1990 amendments that a lot of folks are never told about. You know, a lot of folks receive SSI, and because they receive SSI, they're subject to the whims of the $2,000 resource limit, for instance, right? And so you're always, when you go to work, you know, on SSI, you're always, mathematically, you're better off working than not working on SSI, but you can't ever get out of poverty, right? Because you can't ever save that $2,000 that would allow you to buy that house and that car that are okay to buy under Medicaid, right? Except that in 1990, they changed the act, and they put this little work incentive, this little automatic work incentive in called PES, not PASS, but PES, Property Essential to Self-Support. What it says is, geez, it'd be really hard to run a small business on $2,000 cash. So we're gonna like not pay any attention to what you've got in your small business. So imagine this, that you could have unlimited wealth in a small business and still retain Medicaid. You would lose your SSI check, right? And you would pay taxes and all that groovy stuff that we do. But you could now get out of poverty. And people don't know this. And it's been in the act since 1990. When that happened, that allowed us to go forward with so much around self-employment. So I think, you know, the folklore around benefits is a big deal. Not having universal health care is a big deal. And nobody's talking about that in the debate, that 43 million Americans with disabilities, think about 70% of them going to work next year, and what the payback to Congress would be for that. I think the other thing that we talk about a lot is stigma, and I think it's real, and I think it's misplaced. I think what we end up doing is we end up, because we're separate from the community, we've created a parallel universe to the community. And this is probably, I hope that we can have a little bit of a debate today about this. When we have large systems, and I work a lot in the DD system, I work a lot in the mental health system, what we do is we have so much money, and we have a ton of money, is that we build separate worlds from the community. There are 5,000 sheltered workshops in the United States, 5,000. Think about what that costs, right? And then compare that to what getting one person a job in the community costs. When we build those buildings, whether they're day treatment buildings or whether, and I'm not saying services aren't important. Buildings don't produce services, right? But we can all believe in that, right? When we build a parallel universe, and even if, let's say we start a department store and we fill it with people with psychiatric disabilities as the staff, do you think that anybody coming into that store will not figure out, I mean, because we advertise, right? Who runs this store, who owns it, whether it's a restaurant model or it's a clubhouse model or whether it's a thresholds model or whatever you want to say. When we create a separate thing for people with disabilities, any disability, What we say to the community is, you're off the hook. We'll take care of it. We're the specialists, we know better than you, and there's a place for people like this in our community. Right? Separate. Separate and not equal in most cases. And so I would say that we're sort of the problem, is that we have enough money that we can run parallel transportation systems, healthcare systems, residential systems or housing, and vocational systems. And so one of the things that I would urge you guys to do is not create parallel systems. Don't group people together. Anytime you group people together, you raise stigma, right? If I say to you today, oh, those guys at the university, they don't know what they're doing, right? And we've all said that, and I've worked at 2 universities. I don't admit that in public very often. Why? Because we used to get people who would come on tour of the University of Montana, and we'd, oh, can we walk around? It's such a beautiful campus, and we'd be walking around the campus, and somebody eventually would say, well, how many people work here? And we'd say, oh, about 50%. It's that idea that when you group people together, it's easier to stigmatize them. We also think that if we program to groups of people, it's cheaper, but mathematically, it's not cheaper. It's cheaper to get one person a job. And I know if I took all of you guys at the front table and I said, how about this? How about we start a business together? Right? We'll call it a cooperative, or we'll call it whatever you want to call it. My guess is that you don't want to run it the same way that you want to run it, that you want to run it, that you want to run it. And pretty soon we've got a meltdown, right? And the only unifying thing about that business is that you've each got a label. That's not the way we run businesses. We run businesses around the idea that I have some unique talents and I happen to fit in that business. Right? So I would urge you to stay away from programming for groups and really everything in the law. You read the Rehab Act. The Rehab Act is the best piece of disability legislation ever written. Everything that you would ever need is in the Rehab Act. It's a beautiful document. Not always implemented beautifully, but it's a beautiful document. Look at the Transition Act. Look at IDEA. Look at the independent living policies. Look at whatever act you want to pull. Everything starts with I, individualized. And then when we go to implement, we implement for groups. I don't get it. So, again, that would be my biggest points, that we need to quit saying to the community there's a place for people like us. So.
Okay, so, other comments?
As a devil's advocate.
Carrie and I
had seen each other for 5 years, and we immediately started on this.
I have data.
And you want data? Get data. I'm not going to waste everybody's time on data. Besides, too much of it's proprietary. One of the things, and I think the essence of what you're saying, like I said to you earlier when we were arguing this particular subject, that I'm not married to everything I think, but or everything I say, but there's a basic principle of group dynamics under Yalom, who was a group psychotherapist. And that sense of identification, that sense of belonging, that process that people need to go through before they break free and have that sense of themselves. And so I would challenge the absolutism that I'm not sure you are that absolute. You're shaking your head no. So I think
I'm saying it's individualized.
It's
There's
individualized.
nothing absolute about individualized.
What I suggest, and I have worked with physically disabled children in schools for physically disabled who moved into integrated classrooms, and some of whom thrived and some of whom just were devastated because they were stigmatized in those settings worse than they were in the schools where they were all together with people that they didn't feel any different from anyone else. I think there's a time and a place in certain people's lives, and not everybody's, and nobody, it's very individualized, I absolutely agree, where there's that need for collegiality and a comfort level of, I feel comfortable here, and this will prepare me, and that's the part of it, is sometimes we institutionalize it so much people don't go anywhere. But to prepare people to move on into something else when they're ready. Some people cycle back and forth, and I think there needs to be a safe place for some folks, because the devastation of some types of mental illness at some phases of mental illness, people can't manage the community. They can't manage a typical environment with all the stimuli. So I see it as, yes, individualized, but I see it really, really important to look at recovery. My identity is not my illness. That's how I see recovery. And so to really make a point of, there's a place for everybody. You know, I love the song, all God's critters got a place in the choir. Some sing low, some sing higher. There's got to be a place for everyone, and if I feel like I don't want to be part of this collective, fine. I will help you find your way there. But if I feel like I don't even know where to go, and I don't feel like I've had so many failures in my life that I'm not ready for that, then I need to meet the person where they're at with the goal of when you're ready. Some people will be ready. Some people will never be ready. I can't predict that. I have been so flummoxed by, I don't know if that's the right word, but it sounds right, by people who, when I thought, oh my God, how in the world am I going to help them find a job? And they run me, they go so far beyond my expectations that I realize how, it humbles me. And I get had just enough times to keep humble most of the time, except around Carrie. So I just wanted to speak to that too. So I think we're on the same page, or at least in the same chapter somewhere.
What I would say is think supports rather than services.
So I'd like to ask the peer counselors, what do you see as the primary obstacles in finding people employment or helping people find employment?
Lack of training. We don't have the training facilities to train these people. You know, sure, we can get them out there cutting lawns, but if they can do that at home with their dad, I mean,
So
we need
skill training?
we need to get a skill training.
Sharing your knowledge that you have, like I'm a peer
Speak up
support.
for people at the back.
I'm a peer support specialist, and 4 years ago, I'm diagnosed with schizophrenia, PSTD, and severe depression disorder, and bipolar. And almost 4 years ago, I had no hope, no dreams, no goals, no nothing. I just stepped out of prison. I did 17 years in prison, and I'm totally lost. I was lost more then than when I went into prison. But through vocational rehab and their guidance, and them guiding me to a supportive employment, which hooked me up with Workers Now, which I was hooked up with mental health, and got my medications going, and got hooked up, and was doing some work hours, and I became stronger and stronger every day, and learning more from the other peer supports, and building my self-esteem, knowing that I can do this. I can do this. You know, as before, I wouldn't even try. I didn't like people. I would sit with my back against the wall for 3 days without moving. Just things like that, that I was scared of people. It took me almost 3 years to walk all the way through Walmart, and just happened just a month and a half ago, where I could go and do my own shopping. And so it's a process, and it's a process that everybody's got to get together and agree and share the funding, share everything, ideas and everything. It's just sharing the knowledge that you have, and the love and the care you have for one another.
So I'm hearing you say that some obstacles that you personally faced were lack of hope that things could get better, lack of belief that you could make them better, a criminal record, lack of supports that supported you to get hope.
Right.
And am I missing something? It seems to me you made 4 points. Training, lack of training.
Lack of training.
Okay, lack of training and skills that would make you employable.
Like I've had skills. I've been a carpenter all my life, but then being gone from that trade for so long, I knew I could do this job, but then I wasn't quite sure if I could. So lack of self-confidence, insecurities, and just.
So Dan, what kind of obstacles do you see for people who want to get a higher education?
Well, maybe I'll address this. by sort of touching on a point that I was thinking about as people have been talking in terms of barriers to employment, because it does apply in higher education. Our system, the way we do things at the University of Montana is our role at Disability Services is a civil rights role. We have a civil rights mission. You guys have all heard of the Americans with Disabilities Act and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. Those are civil rights laws for people with disabilities. And they say it's not right to discriminate solely on the basis of a disability, as long as the person can meet the essential functions, say, of a job or meet the academic requirements. And that's the last part that's always the tricky part. One of the first things about it is that when you walk onto campus, nobody knows if you have a mental illness unless you tell them. And so one of the barriers then to receiving some reasonable modifications in your education is going to be your willingness or comfort to say, you know, I have a mental illness, or what that mental illness might be. In other words, self-identification. And what I was thinking about as Carrie was talking about, in particular the issue of stigma, is you know, I'm blind. I'm the president of the Montana Association for the Blind. I'm on the National Federation of the Blind Board of Directors. Okay? But there was a time, I've known Carrie long enough, you might remember this, but I walked around without a cane. I didn't want to identify. What I really wanted to focus on was I wanted people to think about how much I could see, not about what I couldn't see, which was, frankly, a lot. Like maybe you if we were walking along the same sidewalk, et cetera, right? And so for me to take that step and say, you know, I'm going to carry this cane and I'm going to be out about it, was a big step. And so what it made me do systematically every day I picked that cane up was confront my own shame, not stigma that's put on me from others, but my own shame about being a person with a disability. Where does that come from? I don't know. I don't even care anymore. You know, it's a matter of getting out there and being out there. Being, you know, making people see me at the grocery store or Walmart or on the bus or downtown or whatever it might be, or on campus. And sometimes people don't recognize what the cane is about, and that's fine too, because it's always humorous. People have tried to charge me for that cane at a couple of the big box stores, and it's like, that just shows you how big those stores are. They have no idea what's in them. And if they had sold them there, I'd be saving a lot of money too. So, okay, but the point is, those are the kinds of things that we have to deal with. You know, that each of us as a person with a disability. Yes, there is a huge benefit in being part of a group of blind people, because there is that sense of identifying and sharing and so on as well. But our purpose as an organization is not to segregate ourselves, actually, but to put ourselves out there in the community. And one of the advantages for me about it is just in the, you know, every time I meet somebody new or talk to them on email, there's some blind person doing something that I or somebody else thinks that a blind person couldn't do. And that's what I found out when I got involved with blindness organizations. That everything I thought I couldn't do as a blind person, somebody had already been doing long before I thought I couldn't do it. And that's really a valuable lesson for me anyway. So on campus, I mean, one of the biggest barriers to getting access to education is the individual's willingness to self-identify. Okay? I'll briefly describe kind of how things work. If you come to Disability Services, and you say I have a disability, and we get some documentation that we need to, you know, whatever it might be that says, yes, you have a disability, and then we talk with that student to say, how does this affect the way you function? How will it affect your functioning in school? Sometimes it's attendance. Sometimes it's attendance at, you know, given part of the day, you know, whatever it might be. But if you're having, you know, because mental illnesses, as we know, some days are not good and some days are just great. But it's never, you can't count on that. And yet you have to go to class. One of the key things about college is you have to go. A lot of 18-year-olds don't learn that for a while. But it's one of the secrets. Right? Yeah, you get a lot of credit for showing up. And it's true for work as well. So you can we can have some flexibility in some classes in terms of attendance, but there's always going to be a limit an outside limit on how much you can miss. In some classes, because of the nature of that class, it is essential that you be there for whatever reason. There's a carpentry program that's at the College of Technology now. So, if Mark were just learning to be a carpenter, he'd have to go. You have to go pretty much every day. Missing class, you miss stuff. That's just an example. So it's that we help students figure out what those barriers are going to be. Some folks, it's just ability to focus in a sitting down for 50 minutes. I have that trouble too. Unless, of course, I'm talking, and then I can just go on forever. But if I'm having to listen, sometimes it's harder for me. So some students we may arrange for them to have notes in class, or we actually teach them how to get a note taker in their class so they have access to the information in the lecture. Some of these accommodations are the same ones that students with other kinds of disabilities use as well. But what really matters is, how is this going to affect you? Some students actually listen to books, recorded books, as they read along because of the attentional and comprehension issues they may have that are part of A, their mental illness, or B, the effects of the medications that they take to manage that mental illness. Okay? All this we talk about. And then when we kind of get that list, then the coordinator, whoever that might be, will write up a quick letter that we hand to the student. And yes, once again, it's the student that must self-identify in each class. And this is where it gets really tough, because then you have to go to a teacher. Now, the letter won't say, Dan has schizophrenia, or Dan has major depression, or any of that kind of stuff. It'll just say, this is how this person's disability affects their functioning. Here are the reasonable modifications we believe that they have a civil right to receive and should request, and can request. But then it's up to the student to make those requests, okay? And so there's all those steps. Every step is coming out, dealing with the feel of anxiety about telling somebody. Do you have to tell me I have a mental illness? My recommendation has always been, you shouldn't feel ashamed to do so. You should just talk to people about it. And in a collective sense, the more we as people with disabilities out ourselves and talk about our conditions in a way that makes it, say this is like an everyday occurrence. Because you know what the Rehab Act says, is that people with disabilities, are a natural part of the human experience. And I would go on to say that we've always been around and we ain't going away. So it's time to change that stigma by dealing first with our shame, and then talking about this is me, this is who I am, deal with it. But also, it's like, this is natural. This is just part of the deal, and this is what I'm here anyway, and that shouldn't be surprising to you, but it often will be. Now, you also have the right to not tell people if you feel like this is not going to work, but you still can provide the letter and request whatever that modification or series of modifications might be. So, to sum up, there wasn't a timer, I guess. So to sum up, Alexis, back to your question was, one of the real barriers in terms of receiving, reasonable modifications in education is the individual's unwillingness, or maybe not even knowing about their civil rights and had self-identification.
Is there anyone else who wants to add anything new to the discussion of what the obstacles are to employment or higher education?
I have to agree with everything that everybody said. I agree there's a pretty significant stigma out there. But the other thing that I see that's difficult is that when a person with a disability does hit a rough spot in their life, we have a tendency to remove them from their environment, and they have to go somewhere. And so I think keeping those supports and those services in the community and letting them stay integrated through that spot and just helping them with more supports is pretty important.
There's a question way back. She's been waiting.
Brooke?
Well, I have more of a comment. I agree with Carrie and Connie both and the other panelists. I've had a time in my disability where I worked a lot in independent living, and I thought independent living was really the way to go because I worked in it. And my disability, my mental illness was more in a recovery phase, and I thought it would stay that way, but then I got a lot worse. I have really severe depression right now, and I need more support, so I go to day treatment a lot. And I need to be where I can't work. I just simply can't work. I need to be, I just can't work. And I need to be around more support all the time, and I need to have my self-esteem built up a lot, and I just need a lot more support, and I can't work, and I need to be at day treatment. And I don't have the ability to be, I don't want to say out in public because I'm obviously out in public a lot, but I need that extra support, and like Connie was saying, I don't know what words you use, but I can't handle being out like at work and stuff because I just don't have the self-esteem for it right now and the confidence. But and I totally believe in the independent living philosophy because I worked it and I helped people get into that philosophy. But there are times that people need to have like a day treatment model, I think, to get their self-esteem up. And I think when they come out of the hospital, sometimes they need that. And there are times in their life. So, but I think some really big obstacles, like you were saying, to segregate people when they get sick, when they get really sick, and just keep them isolated, like a place like Warm Springs, totally away from any community, is just asinine. It's just a total barrier. And I mean, that's like shutting your sibling or shutting your kids up in an attic when they get sick. And it's just barbaric. So that's about all I have to say, I guess.
So Brooke, if I could, tell me if I'm right. It sounds like you're saying that one of the obstacles to work is the cyclical nature of mental illness, or the cyclical nature of some types of mental illness.
Yeah, I don't know if it's really cyclical for me, but there something like that, yes. It's just not predictable. It's not predictable.
I'd like to take only one more comment because we have a lot to cover by the panel, but Dave had something he wanted to ask.
One of the biggest barriers that stands in my way of working or succeeding at going to school is a denial of my mental illness and my co-occurring disorder, or a reluctance to follow the suggestions of providers. It's like I probably, if I'm in denial, I'll say, no, these symptoms that I have are real and I don't need the medications. Or I can handle substances and alcohol when I'm working for the money, it's mine, and I'll do what I want when I'm at my leisure. You know, and that type of attitude or that type of feeling is one thing that'll defeat my purpose more than anything else. It's important that I comply to my treatment and follow the suggestions of the provider.
And that's kind of the self-understanding and coping skills part that you're working on.
It's taken me the better part of 30 years for me to understand this.
Okay.
So I don't know what people think, how this can be confronted.
We're going to have a question and answer period at the end of the panel. So I want people to know you have a chance to ask questions and make some more comments, but I'd like to work through the major portion of the panel first. So someone else wanted to make a comment about obstacles?
Yeah, I do. My name's Scott, and I'm a peer support for workers now. I do have a card for the carpenter union. I also have the post-traumatic stress disorder. My daughter died in my arms, and it was quite a shock. It turned my whole life around. After a 14-year marriage fell apart, I came up here to Colorado, and Montana, and I was lost, totally lost. I didn't know who I was, what I was doing. And, you know, I had my brother up here, there's no jobs up here. It was harder than heck. And here I am, totally lost, not knowing who I am, what I'm doing, what medications I should be on, what I should be doing, what the hell diagnosis I should be having, let alone what medications, you know. And by the time they got me diagnosed, it was a miracle. I got hooked up with Workers Now because now I get to see people just like me, lost, never had a paycheck before in their life, going down and cashing a paycheck, earning their own money through a thrift store and just short little means, but just think if we could expand their knowledge and help them even further. I mean, it's too late for me to go back to school. I don't know about all that, but you know, I'm getting pretty old, and I don't even know. Oh heck, I wouldn't know where to begin. But you know, I used my back all my life, and I'd like to pass that on. I'd like to share carpentry skills and a lot of skills that we do have, but lack of funding, lack of area to do it.
I'd like to move on to the next question because I think it's really the meat of our panel. What are we doing now that's working to increase employment for people with mental illness? What programs work?
Workers Now.
Amen.
Workers Now. For those of you that don't know, I hope everybody has heard of us as Workers Now. The vocational program through Western Montana Mental Health Center. We started in July of 2008. Since that time, we've served 159 persons diagnosed with the severe disabling mental illness. We have put 159 persons to work in some form, whichever form that they feel they're ready to do, where they're at in their recovery. If persons are sick, that's okay. We work with them where they're at. If they want to work and they understand that that's how you get the things that you want, they're going to go to work. In some form, if it's shoveling snow, well, we don't have any snow in Butte now. But, you know, lawn care, cleaning, we just got a catering truck, a mobile kitchen that we can start training in as soon as it gets licensed and ready to go. We have permanently placed 28 of those people into competitive employment in the community, which is the ultimate goal of the program. We find that a lot of folks don't have the self-confidence, self-esteem to go right into employment in the community. And that hopefully is coming into Workers Now is where they're getting that and finding themselves able and capable, because they have abilities, to move into employment in the community. You know, some of our folks can only work either the want or the need to work under 10 hours a month. You know, and it's tailored to them. If that's what they want, that's what I expect of them, if they can, you know, do that sort of thing. You know, there's some that want to work 10 hours a week, and some that can only work half hour a week, and that's all they can do. And hopefully we're building on that, which I'm saying we are. You know, they start slow and move up. And hopefully, you know, they'll be able to go into, you know, part-time or full-time employment in the community. It's a wonderful program. We've been very successful. We're also the first point of contact for many people coming into the program. We've had 20 new people enrolled with Western Montana Mental Health Center just because of their wanting to work. So what Alexa says about, you know, one of the first 5 questions asked is, what do you do for a living? You know, and folks are being able to say, I have a job. I work for Workers Now, this is what I do, and they're very proud of what they do. We've also helped 9 homeless persons that have inquired about our program and got them hooked up with services and what they need. But the ultimate goal of Workers Now is some training some self-esteem, a whole lot of support in building self-confidence.
You know, we're doing Workers Now in Missoula, and it's newer, way newer, just a couple months old. And so we've got a long ways to go before we reach the achievements that Butte's had. And they've had the benefit of a significant recovery grant, and we had a good recovery grant, but not nearly as much available. But we can build on what we already are doing. One of the concerns I have as a barrier system-wide is, and Stacy, I think you'll feel the same way with Winds of Change, is the mental health services plan. People on Medicaid have a huge number of resources. We can do job development, not job coaching, through Medicaid, unless it's community-based rehabilitation and support. But under the case management line item, which pays significantly better, we can really work with people in terms of some of that finessing the system. We can, you know, if we don't have access to vocational rehabilitation, sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. It depends on the individual and their needs. But we've got so many people in our society who want to work, and poverty is such an issue. And poverty, to me, is one of the biggest barriers. Mental illness is less a barrier than poverty. I think people who have enough funds aren't going to feel the level of stress. And it's not true for every single person, but I think it's pretty generalizable. With our mental health services plan, we now have $120 a month of case management services available. Every other resource that we provide is $25 a month. You cannot run a program. I ran a program 10, 12 years ago with that kind of funding. We couldn't keep it going. I think we've got a better, we've got some resources now that maybe we can make some of that go, but there needs to be layers and also that we can get state resources. If the state wants people to work, pay taxes, buys into the whole concept of recovery, which the state's talking like that, and not pointing at any individual, but system-wide, country-wide, we are not putting our money where our mouth is. We are talking one thing and saying, we want to do this on the cheap. Well, on the cheap isn't necessarily going to work, and I think we have to try and do a good job and all. So, that being said, I think that's a challenge. In Missoula, one of the things we started off doing, which is a little different with what Sarah's doing, I think, we have an employer who is very much an employer who wants to hire people with disabilities. Has about 30% of her company as people with disabilities. It's a cleaning company. It's Quality Maintenance Enterprises. I'll give them a pitch. Won the Montana Association for Rehabilitation Employer of the Year this past year. They have bid on some contracts, daytime janitorial work, mind you, which is almost unheard of. They bid on some contracts for some sites here in Missoula and said, if you can fill them, I'll bid on them. They're daytime. I don't have the ability. My staff work until 2, 3 in the morning. I can't do that, but if you could staff it, this is competitive employment. Yes, they're in a job coaching situation. Yes, it's got an overlay that Carrie and I can have a grand old time talking about. But it is a process by which people can move into that company and away from us and into, she's got, I don't know, $500,000 a year of accounts, and here in Missoula itself and in the Bitterroot. And so there's a potential for people to move on. So right now we have, last count I think it was 8 people who are hired as employees of Quality Maintenance, working a variety of hours depending on what their capacity is, most of whom would not be employed unless we were able to use community-based rehabilitation and support monies through Mental Health Services Plan or Medicaid to help coach those people. We've moved some people totally away from the coaching and they are on their own. They can call us if they need us. The employer can call us, but rarely do they need us. And some people will probably have a long period of time of doing that. And so it's one little tiny piece in addition to a whole lot of other things similar to what Sarah's doing in terms of looking for work and trying to find places for people to be employed. But we have some employers, and I think the isms, of people being afraid to hire folks with mental illness, we've got employers who are more than willing, if we can help them not have to do the the difficult piece of handling challenging issues, social stressors. We can help people get to work, we can overcome the transportation barriers. And maybe once people are settled into a job and we say, you know, you can only work, you know, you can't make substantial gainful activity, you can't make that $1,000 a month, you have a disability, let's go for Social Security. If that's a resource for people, we'll go there. And with that, there's work incentives. Maybe they can buy a car so they can get to work themselves. Maybe they can work themselves off Social Security at some point. It's really trying to work all those things, and God bless Carrie and the people that taught me all the stuff I know about benefits analysis a number of years ago. And I think that's a key piece that so many people do not know. It's just there's so much misinformation. And one program does not mean that the rules are so different, you know, from one program to another. And so I think it's really key to have people available to do benefits analysis within your agencies, within the state, and I think we need to promote that as much as possible.
Yeah, I was looking at the numbers on Social Security on concurrent recipients. People get SSI and SSDI in Montana. Now, not just with one kind of disability. There's over 6,000 people who get both, which is a perfect math for a PASS plan. That's, right now, our average PASS plan is about $7,000 with a range of, you know, 3,000 to, you know, 30,000. If we took the average of $7,000, then we probably, we write more passes than any group in the United States.
I don't think people are gonna know what PASS plan is.
PASS is a plan for achieving self-support under the Social Security Act. It allows you to take your Social Security benefits and go start a business or go back to college or get a job.
Buy a car.
You can use it, it allows you to satisfy a career goal. If those 6,000 people went after a PASS, and mathematically, they're absolutely correct right now, that's $42 million. And that's in the hands of people with disabilities. That's their money. $42 million. That's an astounding number.
Carrie, could you talk a bit about customized employment and
Sure.
why that works and why that may have real potential?
Sure. And yeah, I've been doing supported employment for about 30 years now. Back before there was supported employment, I was a provider on the New Mexico-Colorado border for about 10 years and ran a developmental disability and a mental health program there, and then did other work in Colorado. And moved to Montana about 15 years ago, mostly because I wasn't efficient enough, and I'm still not efficient enough. I've always been interested in disability employment, having come out. I've got 2 family members with psychiatric disabilities. And one of the things that was very clear in their lives was that employment kept them well. And when work wasn't going well or there wasn't work, then things fell apart. There was no social program like a job, as we used to say in our family. So supported employment's been around for a long time, but it's got its weaknesses, and it plateaued about 10 years ago. And so a number of us around the country have been working on what works and what didn't work in supported employment. And customized employment, which is recognized by the Office of Disability Employment Policy out of the U.S. Department of Labor, which we do a lot of work with. They're really the folks who are promoting this, and it's not a program. It is a series of techniques that we use, starting with an assessment process called Discovery. One of the things that we're doing with several of the VR agencies around the country is showing them that typical traditional psychometric testing, for instance, costs a lot of money, and it's not terribly predictable. The research on psychometric testing is pretty poor, actually. But that if we can look at a person and take a snapshot of who they are right now and develop from this process the ideal conditions of employment, that really helps us sort of figure out the job strategy. Right? Very similar to supported employment, very similar to, looking at, the VR model of looking at the individual and trying to figure out what resources and supports that person's going to need. I think where it changes is that in the way that we do it, we have a fundamental understanding that we live in a world of abundance, that there are unlimited ways to make a living. And some of that's going to look like jobs, and some of that's going to look like something that you've never seen before, and some of that's going to look like business ownership, and some of that's going to look like a combination of those. But what happens and what the data reflects is that, you know, people with disabilities are sort of chronically assigned to 5 different job descriptions. And when we start thinking in job descriptions, I met a person at one of the group homes the other day who's really into bicycles. As a job developer, I was taught to take one look at him and say, boy, I can get you a job in a bike shop, or I can help you start a mobile bike repair business. And that'd be exactly the wrong thing to do, because I know one little bit about him. Now, are those skills important? As it was Scott that said that skills were so important? Skills are critically important, but you don't have to have all the skills to start, right? When I was when I worked on the farm, bucking bales, I didn't have any skills before I started. The employer hired me and taught me, right? And you pay me a training wage. He didn't ask if I was ready to go to work. He just said, here I'm going to show you how to do this, and he paid me while he trained me, which is the way almost all of us learned our jobs, right? So again, when I hear people say, well, we need a training center, I get a little, employers are really good at training people, right? So we want to go that way, and that's a customized approach too. Customized employment is an economic development model. It says if I can't find something that fits who you are in the community, let's go create it. Because there's unlimited wealth and there's unlimited power in the world. It helps to have that mindset. That doesn't mean that I'm getting rich or you're getting rich. But it does mean that there's a lot more possibilities open to the world. So the other thing that I would say about customized is that as an employer, when people call and say, oh, I'd really like a job doing what you do, say, great, how much money you're going to bring in? Right? I need to be able to exploit my employees, right? And I use that word on purpose. If I can't exploit you in the marketplace, if I can't generate funds from your labor or your brilliance or whatever it is that you bring me, then I can't pay you, because paychecks don't fall from heaven. Paychecks come from profits, right? And so when we talk about employers maybe being receptive or unreceptive, employers are receptive to people who bring them cash. And so we have to rethink, how is it that you're exploitable? Lots of people went to college to get a degree, right? And if you think about it this way, this is how I make it sound socially acceptable. The average bachelor's degree in the United States today is $55,000. That's what the investment is. And when you graduate, you give that $55,000 investment to an employer. You say, here's my $55,000. And in return for that, I'm never going to cost you more than I bring in. So for somebody with a severe disability and that label, where's their exploitable resource? Where's their $55,000 investment that they give to the employer in return for the paycheck? And this promise that says, I'm going to generate income on some level, I'm going to generate income and wealth. Once you can figure that out, then you will create work for people. And that's a lot of what we're doing.
Can you give an example? Because that's pretty theoretical.
Gee, I've got a really great one this week from Texas with a young lady that we worked with who's really sort of a party animal. And we were able to find a few $1,000s and bought her 2 margarita machines. And so now she's got a job co-working with she's got a partnership with a DJ without a disability, who needed a margarita machine, and then she's got another one set up in a bar, and so she takes the profits, all of that. We've got lots and lots of examples of folks who own things or went back to college. I'm working on one right now for a guy who I think is going to work for a person that basically rehabs used CDs. Right? There's a machine that takes scratches out of them that costs about $1,000. It matches who this person is. I'm not sure exactly yet, but there are lots of resources, from very, very expensive resources. Glenn, who's in Honolulu, who we bought probably $10,000 worth of computer equipment for. It's very hard for Glenn to leave his apartment for a number of reasons. But he telecommutes using that $10,000. He's a code writer for a major computer company. So that was a resource. There's a variety of examples, but it's, again, we try not to make it sound like it's an exotic thing. It's something that we do every day in our society, and we don't think twice about the fact that, there's a guy down the road from me that owns a Peterbilt truck, and he does wide loads, and he's an independent trucker, right? If I took his truck away from him, he'd be driving a truck for $10 an hour. With the truck, he's living on 20 acres on a trout stream, right? That's the resource. And again, we don't blink about that when a person without a disability does it. In fact, we accept that we're supposed to do it. We're supposed to invest in our careers. Yeah?
One of the questions I have, and I think a barrier, and I'd be interested to see how you would look at this. One is our society is very multitasking. Most employers, if you can't multitask, you're not going to get employed. And there was one other piece too, that so many people can do labor work, but people's backs wear out, their hips wear out, and so many folks don't have that skill beyond labor, but their bodies won't let them. How would you address that? Because that, to me, those are the two biggest areas. People with severe and persistent mental illness, many people have trouble multitasking. Not that they're not intelligent, but they just can't handle all that stimulus at once. And so how do you find a way to help people get out of poverty, in that kind of a mode? I'd be interested in your model with that. Sure.
Well, again, it's individualized, and none of this stuff's easy. We can stand up here and make it sound, well, 5 minutes, and we're talking a lot of work. Systematic instruction is something that's been forgotten, especially in the mental health field. We can teach people really complex tasks, right, using basically that engineering model. That's something that Mark Bold taught us in institution years ago. But again, what are we doing for technology? One of the resource ownership things, we just created a business in Newport Beach, California. It's desktop manufacturing. It's a computer and a 4-station embroidery machine. You're talking $10,000 to put somebody with severe fatigue issues to work. The machine does most of the work. He would rather be the artistic person anyway. So again, it's individualized. I think you're right. I think a lot of employers have gotten used to this fact that certainly in our company, you multitask, you do all kinds of different stuff. But again, that's why you look at work differently. And I don't look for job descriptions. I look for ecological match. I look for where do people fit and what are the things that people do well, and then negotiate that job. And does it work? Well, it works better than other kinds of negotiations that we've done, but does it work 100%? No, not like your life. But, and again, in some of the more extreme cases, that's where we end up with self-employment.
Well, one of the things we face as a society is that the nature of work is changing dramatically, and I think Connie mentioned it. We're shifting from a manufacturing society to a society of information, and that most of the jobs that our children will have don't even exist today. So I'm throwing out to Dan and to Brooke and to Connie and to Carrie, Sarah, Tracy, how do you address that when most of the jobs don't even exist today that people are going to make their living by in the next 10, 15 years? How do you respond to that shift in our overall economy, and how does that relate to people with mental illness? How do you reach out to that?
Well, I can take a flippant answer at that, which is that I don't worry about it. Is that I think about what the person wants to do, or the skills that they bring to the table, as Scott was talking about, and go from there. I don't worry about the labor market, right? The labor market's tough right now, but if you go to the 1990s, we created 22 million new jobs in the United States. In the 1990s, the unemployment rate for people with disabilities was exactly the same as it is today. It's neutral, right? It's a great excuse for, and it is tougher today, I will say that. It is a tougher economy than we have ever seen, I think. But again, there are people buying stuff every day, right? And there are new ideas every day. I think if we keep looking for, ooh, what's the job that's open? One of the great things about customized employment is that it repudiates this idea of a comparative model, right? And one of the things that we do when we're answering one ads, when we're going and filling out applications and all those things, is that even if you're really qualified and somebody figures out that you have a disability, if it's visual or I mean if it's visible to people or not, once the employer figures that out, who do they hire? They almost always hire the other person. So why would we use that model to get jobs, right? Think about the way that typical people get jobs, right? 90% of jobs in the United States are never advertised, and you get them through connections. Again, if we run parallel systems parallel to the rest of the country, right, or your community, you're not ever going to hear about those jobs, right? I can guarantee you today in Missoula, Montana, that there's 20 people within 5 blocks of here talking about employment problems. Why aren't we talking with them? Why are we talking, I mean, we already know what each other knows, right? We already know the same stuff. We need to talk to people who know other stuff. Right? That's the way you break that.
And yes.
An example, I was just talking to Paul Meyer, our executive director, about this. We contract as an agency with different companies. And I said, how about I get some help in talking with these companies about, we know you're going to be going out there hiring. We want you to hire our people, and we'll make sure the work gets done. We'll make sure you continue to make your profit. And you'll get a tax incentive for most of these people. If employers get a tax incentive if people are on food stamps, if they are on SSI and Medicaid, you know, there's a number, going through vocational rehabilitation, there's a number, if they're a veteran who's been on food stamps, there's so many pieces, I just get lost in it all. You know, but if we can, within our own connections with people, to say, I don't want to take a work away from your company, I don't want to do your work necessarily. Now this is, I'm not trying to tell you you're not doing a good job, because yeah, you're doing a wonderful job. But I think there's many layers we can take advantage of. And to say, how can we partner? And you continue. We don't want to buy the machinery necessarily. I don't have the money. I don't have the money that Sarah had. We got, quite a bit less than we'd asked for, and that's the reality of it. I'm not complaining. But so we adapt. So can we work with somebody who already has big machinery, but we have people who are skilled? And can we get them in there somehow and make them part of your workforce? And maybe if they're really good, maybe you'll have other contracts that you're going to involve them in. And they can sort of slowly seep away from us and they'll acknowledge us, but maybe not, necessarily need us that much in time. Or maybe they'll need us a lot. I don't know. It's individualized. So I think there's different ways of doing it and talking to people and saying, hey, I talked to an employer the other day. I said, I'm trying to find non-labor jobs for people. Office work, people who have, I've got a gal who's got a bachelor's degree in accounting. She can't be an accountant now because her disability has really affected her brain to the degree she can't manage that, but she still has office procedures, office politics, office culture. And she said, we're trying to do filing. I've got this backlog of this. Hey, can we try and bring in a Workers Now person and do something like that? And so there's that kind of stuff that I think we can do. I sound like my mother. Honest to God. She's nodding, saying she's finally getting it. But but I think we need to really cultivate those people who are business people, especially the small business people. I think tend to be have an easier time. Not some of the larger companies do too, but by and large, it's those smaller companies that we might be able to just find that just right fit. The 10 hours a week for people who can't work more than such and such or can't tolerate work for more than a certain amount of time.
Well, and I think it's important to always be looking at, from a voc rehab perspective, the future of employment and where employment is shifting. And so we use a few online resources to look at, what new jobs are being created and what the skill set is for those particular jobs. And I think it is hard when we do get clients that come in that really do not have a lot of transferable work skills. They can't continue doing what they've done all of their life. And so we work closely with our adult education program here. That often is a great starting point for clients to start brushing up on basic skills and helping people obtain basic computer training. I think more and more we're seeing job descriptions requiring some basic computer skills. And so Voc Rehab, that is one service of the many services we can help with, is helping people obtain that basic academic type of training.
Thanks, Steve.
And one of the things that we're doing in our program is as work readiness, or with folks who are fearful about benefit losses, we're doing a lot of volunteering. And I think that that's really important to continue to look at volunteering as a stepping off place for folks. It can provide those good contacts of people who don't have a work history. It can get them a good reference if they do a good job. And we've had a couple that have actually turned into paid employment. So I think that you have to look at the whole gamut of what's available and where people start. And I think that education is important. I think that volunteering, some people come in and they're like, yeah, just help me, get my resume ready and I'll go look at competitive employment. But I think we have to look at providing a broad range of opportunities for people with mental health issues, and individualizing that to each person, of what's going to work for them, and not just look at how many people are in paid employment. I think that that's the end goal, is to have people in paid competitive jobs, but I think that we have to look at a spectrum of people are going to start at all different levels, and we have to provide services at each of those levels and the level of supports that each person needs. So one person might need a job coach type person with them on a very regular basis for long periods of time. Other people might just need someone to kind of review with them. Employers do great training. Some of our folks need a little extra or need that extra support. So we provide that. And so I think that really looking at a broad spectrum of what employment might look like is a good place to start. And I think that volunteering is, again, one of those places that a lot of people start to build their resumes, make those contacts, because we do know that it does seem to be who you know to get jobs.
Yes, sir.
I'm amazed at folks and what they actually are able to verbalize to you as to job skills. And then when you get them on the job, they have all these skills that are really transferable, and you don't know that until you actually see them on a job and work with them and learn about them. I don't think they realize how many job skills they truly have. So, your question is to, what are we doing for ongoing, how we're building in vocational stuff. The kids coming up and out of school, my daughter can run a computer, and I think a lot of folks are being taught that. So I think, they're gonna have those basic skills as they're growing into, career path. And I think the same for the folks with mental illness, just because of the fact I've seen that. They don't always vocalize the skills they actually have.
Lori, I'd like you to talk a little bit about whether or not the Social Security work incentives are actually working to help people work.
I think that is pretty individual specific. But what I hear from people that call is that, especially if they've gone through a process of getting eligibility, they say, I can't work right now, I don't want to work right now. But what I know from working in this is that a lot of people can work at some level and come out financially better ahead. That's how valuable the work incentives are. And they make allowances for medication and transportation, and if you do want to start your own business, setting some money aside for that and still keeping your benefits up, keeping your health insurance through a period of time. And I think the biggest breakdown in the work incentives system is there's not a lot of accurate knowledge out there about what's available. What I see Social Security doing a little bit is trying to expand that information base. And I think they figured out they can't just talk to people. They have to provide hands-on assistance to tracking, reporting the wages and the trial work period and at what stage your benefits are going to be affected. If people can access that support system and it is free, I think they're pretty successful at working at some level.
Could you speak to the Medicaid's buy-in? Do you have information about that?
You know, I'm just on the edges of Medicaid buy-in. I think Anita, one of our attorneys, our policy people.
Could I just give a thumbnail just for people? The legislature passed something called the Medicaid buy-in. And word has it, I am not the official person, but word has it that by July 1st of this year, that will go into effect for people on SSDI who are working. Those people will be, the administrative rule is in the process of being written. I haven't heard anything about any meetings yet. I don't know if there are meetings yet. So get the word out when they have those, because they're usually a teleconference or webinar. People would be able to buy Medicaid for a very cheap rate. We won't have to mess with MHSP as a result. For people who are on SSDI and working. How much they're working, I don't know. So look for that to be coming out, and I think there'll be a lot more information. And many people will be able to then have a much higher quality of life, and I think we can reduce the poverty factor as part of Social Security bill.
Yes.
Can I say something about Social Security? Well, I don't know much about it. All I know is that they told me no a lot. They told me no, SSI told me no a lot. For about 4.5 years, they said no.
No
And
to what?
No to,
Working?
no,
Social
no,
Security.
no to Social Security.
Oh, no to
Because
Social
I couldn't
Security.
work. Yeah, and then I was going through all my,
They denied you?
they denied me for about 4.5 years. And then when I finally got it, it really doesn't matter to me because I'm working 40 hours a week. And getting up and going to work every day is a blessing from above. And it just makes me feel so good about myself and being able to help others and show others the skills that I have, so maybe one day that they can go out and not have to worry about depending on somebody else or being said no to for 4 or 5 years or whatever. So.
And I think that for most people, there are different components. Some people need both the cash benefit and they need the health insurance that comes with it. I get a lot of calls from people that say, you know, I'm making enough money to support myself, I get enough support, I can't afford to lose my health insurance. I need help with that. And those protections are built in with the work incentives.
Can you talk a little bit about how that works and is it working?
Well, I think it is, and there's different benefits under each program, SSI and SSDI. Under SSDI, you get a trial work period for 9 months where you can make as much as you want. Then you get 3 more months of grace. Then you move into a period of SGA where anytime you earn over $1,000, you won't get a cash SSDI check, but you'll get to keep your Medicare benefits. And that goes on for years. You can go on for up to 8 years and still get Medicare with that. Under SSD or under SSI, once you hit a certain limit, then you're eligible for Medicaid. You're still eligible for Medicaid under 1619B.
So what does that mean?
That means you're making enough money to not get a cash SSI check, but you're still able to keep your Medicaid for a period of time.
How long?
5 years.
About 8.5 years
8.5,
right now.
yeah.
8.5 years.
Yeah. But that's.
Depends.
Yeah.
But
Depends
that's a
on how much you make.
pretty good number.
It's a pretty good number, but a lot of people don't have that knowledge. And unless you're probably not gonna get it from the Social Security office. Where you're gonna get it is in the community from a benefits planner or work incentives coordinator or someone.
For
like-
you.
Yeah, or us, you know, I'm gonna refer you to the right place, but that's where you're gonna get the knowledge.
It's also a great website. It's California-based, but it's www.disabilitybenefits101, and I think it's .org, but it could be .com. Run by the World Institute on Disabilities. Again, it's got Medi-Cal and all that stuff in it, but it does give you sort of the basis of that. Workworld.com is another great place to go. There's some real, I mean, it's almost written in English. You can almost understand it.
Well, because Medicaid has the same benefits limit as SSI has, which is that $2,000 in assets, which is what prevents people from getting out of poverty. Can you talk a little bit about the programs, briefly, about the programs that help you put aside the money so that you can work, keep your Medicaid, and build up some assets so that you can either buy a car, do whatever you need, buy a house, do whatever you can do to improve your life?
Well, Carrie touched on those a little bit. I think probably the most popular one is a PASS plan, which is Plan for Achieving Self-Support. And that, it's a perfect plan for people that are dual recipients because you can set some of your SSDI money aside in a special savings account for approved expenses and have that money not count towards SSI. So you get a little bit bigger SSI benefit. You still retain your health insurance under both plans. They're time sensitive, and when you withdraw money from there, it needs to be for an approved set of expenses. You have a PASS cadre that kind of goes through the plan with you and helps you monitor that with Social Security. And then the PES plan, which is generally, I think we see it for self-employed individuals where they can have under Medicaid and SSI, you can have a car and a house. This allows you to have property that you need to support yourself that is not counted towards that income limit of $2,000.
Is it PASS? Is that the other one?
PES.
And PES is automatic.
PES, P-E-S.
And can you also put earnings into the PASS or PES?
You can put earnings into a PASS, but not a PES.
PES allows you to keep resources in a small business. Okay, that's the easiest way.
And how about IDAs?
I don't have a lot of IDA knowledge.
And I don't know that, is Montana even an IDA state?
Yes.
Canada
okay.
has.
Can you tell us what it is?
Yeah.
Tell us what it is.
IDA is an individual development account. It's run through the Montana Credit Union Association. There are only a limited number of credit unions that offer these IDA accounts. They are designed to help people get out of poverty, and they only work if you are working. But they are again a way to accumulate assets that are not countable to the $2,000 limit for SSI and Medicaid. And they're a little bit broader than a PASS plan. They're first of all done, and they have one brilliant, absolutely brilliant quality that no other plan has. If you get an IDA, various foundations, individuals, and charities have agreed to match the money that you put in the IDA. So you can get a match of $1 for every dollar you put in, and there are even some that will match $4 for every dollar you put in, up to a maximum amount. But you can only put money in there that you have earned, and how it's counted and whether it's counted varies from state to state. But the last time I checked in Montana, it is not counted for Medicaid or SSI. So it allows you to put money aside, for example, for the down payment on a house. Neither a PASS plan or a PES plan will help you save for the down payment on a house. It helps you put money aside for education.
That's not true.
No.
Oh, is that not true? See, that's why we have the experts here. It allows you to put money aside for education, and it allows you to put money aside for any employment-related expenses, which oftentimes include a car, because in Montana, it's hard to get to work if you don't have a car.
Is that the Family Self-Sufficiency Program through Housing Authority? Is that, or not necessarily Housing Authority, but is that part of that mix? It sounds familiar.
Not that I know of. It's through the
Okay, there's a-
Montana Credit Union Association, and in fact, Poverello here in Missoula has IDAs.
Because there are programs for people in public housing called Family Self-Sufficiency Programs, where people can put money aside for purchasing a home or for education if you're working, and the income guidelines for living in those kind of settings are adjusted. So there's some nice programs out there. The Job Service has a connection. Here in Missoula, Paula Marcinkowski is the contact person for that. So, you know, if you have that interest, I can make that connection. My card's rolling around here someplace, so.
So I think what I'm hoping people are hearing is that don't let the fact that you will make money if you work and you may face losing the things that you depend on, don't let that stop you from pursuing employment. There are a number of ways in which you can work. You can develop some personal assets and improve your economic situation without necessarily losing all of your health insurance or your SSDI, SSI. Did anyone else want to talk about what's working and what's not? Or let's stick with what's working at this point. What's working? We're focused on what programs are working and are actually helping people overcome the obstacles to employment. Dan, did you want to say something?
You know, I guess maybe I don't really have any clear ideas about it. I agree that it has to be pretty individual, and you know, as far as students at the university, the things that seem to work are people really finding something they get excited about, and you know, the key is just, you know, perseverance. You know, one of the things about life and about work, of course, is that you have to learn all the time. You know, I have this phone that's way smarter than I am right now. But, you know, every day I get just a little bit smarter, and one of these days I might catch up to it. Of course, by then, you know, it'll be outdated, Scott says, and he's right. But and I think that's a really important part of it. You know, it's like, and this is really tough, you know. 30 years ago, I heard this thing had nothing to do with disability, but it was a big study they did over about a 5 or 10 year period of college graduates with either liberal studies degree, a specific degree in liberal studies, which means you take everything, and one that was like a business management degree, and business administration, and the bachelor's degrees. And they compared people who went to work with those degrees in corporate America over a long period of time. And what they found out was this, is that the business administration people got hired and made significantly more money for about the first 3 years. But by the year 5 and beyond that, people with liberal studies degrees that were general, didn't know all the specifics about business, had almost universally gone way past them into higher level management jobs. And which runs it, I know Brooke will hate me for saying this, but I used to be a voc rehab counselor too. And so I know what this is about. It's like, this means is that specific, I'm going to be a businessman and I'm going to get this business degree and so on and so forth. Isn't actually true, necessarily. It might get you that first job, but it won't get you, you know, necessarily a career. So in terms of that future, the things that will work for people, I think, are not thinking specifically about, you know, a specific kind of occupation, because we don't know if they're going to be here 5 or 10 years. And you know why? Because our 13, 14-year-olds are inventing those new jobs of the future right now on their, you know, who would imagine you could make money off selling little things to put on your cell phone 10 years ago? You know, so, you know, like the notion that we got to think out of the box and just follow what, you know, be curious is what it really boils down to. And where that curiosity exists is where something may really start to click in terms of both education and you know, self-directed employment opportunities. Whatever really gets you going.
Yeah, Brooke. Yeah, and I just wanted to add too, and we've touched on it a little bit, is Voc Rehab can help with self-employment, and I don't think a lot of people know this, and self-employment is another great work incentive. And so for people who aren't able to work out in the community but still want to work, sometimes looking at helping them develop a business based on something that they love doing, I've had some great successes with that. It's a great way for people to supplement their income and work and be able to build upon a business, and sometimes in conjunction with doing past plans is another way to get additional funding and resources to help those folks. So Voc Rehab can help with up to $5,000 to help people with those startup business costs, which is great, and I don't think we do that enough. So that's what I'm saying.
Lori?
And I think when we're dealing with people with disabilities of all sorts, we have to really be cognizant of thinking outside the box. We get so polarized into thinking they must only be in janitorial services or whatever, but I think, from what you've said and different people here in the room, we need to capitalize on the individual skills that person has, and be very creative about getting them out into a position.
When I get people coming to me, I like to work with people through Voc Rehab because there are lots of resources through that service. Partly training, upgrading skills, a work assessment, which gives a person a chance to try something out, and the employer tends to be open to that because it doesn't cost them anything. And on-the-job training, those are great resources. A lot of times I find people coming to my door, and it's the poverty issue again. I have no money, my rent is due, I don't have time to wait for Voc Rehab. So I try to do both at the same time if at all possible. But sometimes the only jobs are the service jobs. And sometimes that's what people feel comfortable doing because they know how to do that. And I don't want to, those jobs will always be there. They are not generally going to be jobs that are going to go away. So it's an okay thing to have, but it's not the only job that's out there. And my struggle really is, what can we access for people when we have 417 people who made $70,000 in my neighborhood who don't have jobs now? We have to sometimes try and help people get a job so they can get moving. One of the other really big pieces is, how can people get the supports they need to maintain their mental health? Work adds a layer of stress. And we do have more resources now, I think, to provide those supports. But when people can't access mental health care because we've got a 3-month waiting list for a psychiatrist, or they can't get into a therapist because they've got mental health services plan, and we've got a 5-month waiting list for that. And that is not Western Montana Mental Health. That is, our society is so bogged down with accessing resources, and it makes me cry sometimes just thinking. I don't get whatever. It just bothers me terribly that people can't get the simplest resources before they go into crisis, because the darn system's so crisis driven. Our legislature, I don't think we're having an acute care model in our legislature for chronic care conditions. And
Honey, you've already jumped the hurdle.
I'm sorry.
We haven't gotten yet to
I'm
what
sorry.
do we need to do. We're
Okay.
still on what's working. But
I
we
do
will,
that.
that's kind of our next
Thank you for interrupting
question.
me.
So I'd like to see if we've pretty much covered what we think is working, what some of the options and resources are to help people work. And now that we kind of have a feel that there's a wide range of opinions on what's working, I'd like to talk about perhaps the big challenge that faces the SAAs. How can we restructure existing systems to make them more effective without adding new funding? Because the reality is we're probably going to have to struggle if we want new funding. But what can we do with the existing resources to make them more effective? What can we do with existing programs or existing resources?
I think that if a collaboration between programs, sharing the funding, would help a great deal. For instance, vocational rehabilitation does not recognize Workers Now and contribute to that funding needed to train that person that we have placed into employment, because we call it temporary employment. Just because of that terminology, they don't recognize that. But the minute they get placed, they sure, jump in and take credit for that. The same is true in corrections. They have a big budget too. Are they doing what they need to do? I don't know, because we see an awful lot of people in pre-release and that sort of thing needing our support. So I think if you use the funding streams that are out there and collaborate more, I think it will help a great deal.
To be more flexible in the way in which money can be spent
Between agencies.
between agencies. Any other suggestions for what we can do to restructure existing programs without new money? Carrie?
Well, I just challenge your premise that
Okay.
There's plenty of money. There is a ton of money. I have a friend who tells a story about going to the grocery store. He comes home from work, he changes into his jeans, he goes to the grocery store, he does weekly shopping, gets to the checkout counter, reaches around, realizes he's left his wallet at home. Now, Bill's not poor, his money's in the wrong pants, right? We buy so much stuff that doesn't work, whether you're a special ed kid who gets an IQ test every 3 years for God knows why, or whether we're throwing, VR, not to pick on VR, VR is a really good friend of ours. VR is involved in 60% of the self-employment closures that we have nationally. They are a great partner of ours. But, as we all know, they spend more on testing every year than they do on job placement, right? Why are we doing that? We know that everybody can work. Everybody can work. I've never met anybody who couldn't work. Right now we have to, just what you guys have been doing is redefining work. You've been saying, well, some people can work a half an hour, and some people, but there's nobody who doesn't get up in the morning and maybe make toast, right? There were thousands of people across the country this morning that were paid to make toast, right? That's work, right? So I would say again, get outside the system, right? Where's the wealth? If you're not finding it in your system, which I think there's plenty, right? Again, we buy the wrong stuff. You have to quit doing stuff that doesn't work and start doing stuff that does work. But, this is a very wealthy country. It's the most expensive disability system on earth, for one thing. But again, Ernesto Ceroli wrote a wonderful book a number of years ago called Ripples from the Zambezi, where he talked about third world development. And what he saw in the third world is the same thing that we have in spades in this country. And that is that, again, within a mile of here, there's 5 other people working on the same problem you're working on. And we're talking in circles. We're talking to one another. We already know what each other knows. So it's not about more program. I would argue that it's about less program, more supports that people need. People need acute care. People need long-term management strategies. They need friends. They need families to stay intact, right? They need good medical care. They need all those things. But we also have to allow communities to do what communities do best, which is care for one another. And as long as we segregate people in all the ways that we do it, from Special Olympics to businesses, those are all segregated things, right? Until we can recognize that, we're saying to the community, stay away. We know what we're doing. We're the experts here. And I think we really have to look at that stuff. I think that's probably the key more than money is. We've had plenty of money.
Can you speak to natural supports maybe in that, because you're kind of a key
Well,
person in
natural
that.
supports, that's a term that gets thrown around a lot, but, people have coworker support, right? It's one of the things that we get a lot, because we use job coaches a lot in our work. But one of the things that we hear a lot is, my job coach needs to be like a CIA agent. They need to be there when I need them, and they need to be invisible the rest of the time. And I think that takes pretty serious training sometimes. But yeah, everybody needs support. So let's look at how is it that we do that, right? How do we do that in typical lives, right? And again, there's not one answer. There's not one prescription for this. But again, more services, more programs is probably not what you want.
So
Programs are good. I've been a program person all my life, but enough, I think.
So if I understand you correctly, and I'm not sure that I do, what I'm hearing you say is that we need to be using the community as a resource rather than using programs as our resource.
I'm not saying get rid of programs. Programs play a vital function here, but I'm saying that over-reliance on this puts us at odds with the community. When there's an economic development meeting in this town, is anybody here invited? No, because we're outside of the sphere of economic development. Why is that? Don't we all need jobs? Don't we all contribute? I think we do. And there's no interest criteria. You don't have to pay to go to those meetings. You could just show up and say, hi, I'm a citizen here. I have, I'd like to work here. Those are pretty important things, right?
So in terms of taking what we have, you made one comment. It seems Voc Rehab is spending much more on evaluating than they are in
Well, I don't want to pick on them,
job
but
service.
we can
Well,
find
that's-
that in every system.
I'm sure, but we're talking about what, as an SAA, what kinds of recommendations can we make to make employment more accessible, more available to people with mental illness? And what I'm asking is for concrete examples of ways to make our system more responsive to the individualized needs of people with mental illness. How do you make the connection between the person with skills, and the person may not even know what their skills are, but everybody, as you say, has skills. So how do you make the connection between the person with skills who wants to work and the job that would use those skills?
Is there a board down at the unemployment offices that I'm not aware of that says special employment workers for mental health workers?
No.
I don't know of one. I think we are reaching out to our community as deeply and as heartily as we can through our thrift stores, through our marketing. All of our stuff is totally non-profitable, and we're beating our heads against the wall. I mean, we're asking our clients to go out there free and do our marketing so that they can go to work. I mean, how much more can you ask for them? I mean, help me out here. I'm at a loss. I really am.
Well, Scott, I think that's a good thing, though, because because really everything that we do in terms of services has got to be about putting people in charge of our people with disabilities in charge of our lives, right? And that's we need to be the ones. So there's an old saw that says all the inmates are in charge of the asylum, or it looks like that. That's supposed to be derogatory, but I think it's a great idea. Let's take over our own stuff. Let's run our own show. It's like we know what we want. Nobody knows better than we do. If we don't know, then that's what we got to start thinking about is what we really want. So the people are going out to promote that program. I think that's good as long as what they're going out to say is, I can work. Give me some work. I'll do some work for you.
Okay,
That's a plus.
I'm going to ask the panel to just. Okay, so I think we're ready to roll.
That felt good.
I want to finish.
Did I miss the break?
This has become an endurance test. So what I'd like to do is finish the thought that we have before the panel, and then we'll open it up for questions. And the thought we have is are there any suggestions for ways to change the programs that currently exist to make them more responsive, more effective in providing employment? Yes, Brooke?
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment about that. One of the greatest benefits and also one of the greatest barriers of Voc Rehab is that we have supported employment funding. And for supported employment is a service that's provided to clients who need that ongoing support to work in the community. And with Voc Rehab, because we're a temporary program and short term, for people who need that long-term support to help maintain employment in the community, there's a waiting list for that service. And currently, the waiting list, I think in Missoula, I looked this morning, has, let's see, what is that? I want to, let's see.
It's like
in
5
here,
years now.
32. Anyway, but with that waiting list, you know, we're only able to take 1 or 2, you know, people off. And I'm not going to go into that whole issue. But what I wanted to mention with supported employment, one way to look at shifting things around would be to have more work adjustment training up front, meaning that we invest the money up front to really teach people good, solid work skills that they can then build upon and carry with them, as opposed to just saying, oh, you know, we've done an assessment, we've determined, you know, this person isn't capable of working, they need these long-term supports, let's put them on this waiting list for 8 years. You know, that's not working. And so that's one way, from a Voc Rehab standpoint, that I could see a shift and I think save some money in the long run, too.
Just as a point of clarification, there is that long-term waiting list, that extended employment waiting lists. But the mental health centers, and I don't know where you are, Stacy, you can speak to that, but I know for us, that generally we are able to meet the needs of people without them having to be on those waiting lists.
But that's just, let me clarify that, that's just with Western Montana Mental Health. So people who have a mental illness who are not involved with their program, if they need those long-term supports, are gonna have to go on that waiting list. And I think, Stacy, we are in the process of developing some collaboration with Winds of Change, but.
Yes, we are, and again, it would be, you know, we can't provide those services unless they're a client of ours. But yeah, collaborating and then taking over some of those long-term supports so that they don't have to go onto the waiting list.
Okay, so are there any other comments about how we can change our existing system to make it more responsive, more effective?
One of them, and I was happy to hear, Sarah, that you said, you know, you've got 20 people that came in because they're looking at vocation, you know, for vocational reasons. If you are a person without Medicaid right now, unless you're in crisis, generally, the way the funding is set up, you don't get in. You don't get into services. It takes, if you're homeless, maybe, but even with the mental health services funding through that homeless outreach program, the PATH money, my understanding is it's harder to get in now than it used to be. We have some real bottlenecks, and I think people are gonna only lose. I think it doesn't take much sometimes to avert a crisis. But ignoring that crisis, you're gonna, you know, that crisis is brewing, you're not gonna avert it. And so, I don't know how best to deal with that, except we're a very crisis-driven industry, if you wanna call it that, which I guess is what it is. And, I've got a degree in public health. I look at prevention, and it's a push me, pull you kind of thing. You know, trying to figure out how to make that piece work with the amount of funding we do get.
Okay, so at this time, I would like to open it up to the audience to ask questions about employment-related issues, or education-related issues, or Social Security work-related benefits. Yes, Brenda?
I wonder if the panelists who have knowledge in the area could address the issue of veterans who have veterans disability, and there's subsets of that, I'm sure you know that. And are there any additional resources for them or different resources that would be helpful for us to know about?
I deal with veterans. The VA Vocational Rehabilitation Program, which is not the VA per se, it's the VA Voc Rehab. I believe it's a 10%, if not a 20% disability, service-connected disability, gives you a way in the door. You may or may not be eligible for those services. But those folks are over they're just in the building where the IRS is. And so if you have veterans who are, if you want their number, I'll give it to you. Catch me afterwards. But they are a resource and they collaborate with State Folk Rehab as well, because both programs have different focuses. They do focus on education as well as on employment, but the education is a employment-related education, as is the state. So that's, I think, and then any veteran with a disability who may not have VA Voc Rehab resources certainly can apply for services through the state Voc Rehab.
Right, I was just looking at additional.
I'll just give you a couple of resources. We work on a couple projects. One is the Homeless Veterans with Disabilities Project. And so if you just Google that, there's a variety of fact sheets on benefits. There's a new webinar that we're going to be producing shortly on that. And then we work on a thing called the Entrepreneurial Boot Camp for veterans, and we do the disability portion of that, and that's through the Whitman School of Management at Syracuse. And if you just go to the Whitman School's website, there'll be a bunch of stuff on that. That's also at UCLA and Texas and Purdue and whatnot, but the Whitman School is the one place you have to go, and there'll be a variety of resources there for vets.
Thank you.
Also at the job service, Gary Schwartz is the VA job service representative and a great contact person. And Gary has started a VA networking group that I'm a part of, the VA Voc Rehab's a part of, and multiple other agencies in the community, and we're meeting quarterly, and it's been great.
Thanks.
And Dan?
There's Montana has a veterans waiver, partial tuition waiver. So basically, we as Montana taxpayers subsidize veterans partly to go back to be retrained to go to college. And Alexis was just saying that also that I'm not real familiar with this. If a veteran or a service person is killed in action, and they have children, those children can get tuition waived as well.
Thank you.
Yes, Tom?
I'm wondering, when you work with individuals, work is an important part of a person's life, but there's, multiple things that people need other than just work. How do you address any of those other issues? Because, having a job is one thing, but keeping a person motivated to do that, but still have a life or
As a peer
be
support,
more than just a worker or somebody that has a job.
as peer support, we talk and ask how they're doing, how things going outside the job, and how they're feeling, how they're taking their medicine, and how things are going for them, how they're feeling,
I
and
think
things like
you
that.
guys get into spiritual stuff too,
Yeah.
how is that, and how is that a focus in your life? Do you wanna change that, or how do you wanna, pursue that if they do?
So you actually deal with all those things.
All aspects,
Whatever
all
life
aspects.
are you most unhappy with today, What's really bothering you?
I think you're probably also talking to a table full of workaholics, so.
Oh.
But I think having money in your pocket goes a lot to solve a lot of those
You
problems.
can go to the movies when you want to, and
We do listen to them, and if they feel like just talking, we'll listen. If they feel like talking and wanting some feedback, we give them feedback, and we give them our ideas and our opinions and what we've been through, and just our experiences.
Can I ask you personally, why would you be better than a person that didn't have a mental illness working with those same people?
Because I relate.
And they relate back?
I relate to a lot of what they're going through, and I've been through a lot of what they've been through. Not the same thing, I don't feel the same thing they feel, but as close as I can get. And I understand, I feel I understand them better than anybody that's normal.
We had another question?
Yes, I have a joint question for whoever came. One, I was wondering, I've been in a position of volunteering.
Speak up, Nancy. Right?
I've been in a position of volunteering and broadcasting for 14 years, okay? I want to venture out and I want to do, not broadcasting, but I want to do like a public service for Missoula, okay? And I was going to go and try to go to another agency, but what I've heard today is the heck with that, do it yourself. That's why I heard this gentleman over here to do it. And I want to start before you leave. And the other thing is, it's advertising, okay? I work with a lot of merchants and stuff like that. And I have ventured out just speaking it out what I want to do, and I got them like piled up, you know, to help me with this. And the thing is, I've had 4 businesses before I had rental illness back home, okay? Would there be anything in schooling that I would need to go further with this goal of mine? Is there a way, do you have like advertising classes where you can set in or, you know, or go and learn more up-to-date stuff like with computer and stuff like that?
Nancy, I think you would need some experience in upgrading maybe some tax information, if it's different from what you've done in the past. Bookkeeping, as a person who's had my own business, the biggest mistake I made was not to hire a bookkeeper to get me to figure out how to do it right. And I'm suffering that still, which it makes me more sensitive to those who are struggling with starting businesses or maintaining businesses. I think some of those practical skills, maybe some computer skills along those lines would be really helpful. Because it sounds like you know what you want to do.
Yeah.
And then getting into something, you know, where you get really specific.
Well, and then also in adult education, they offer a series of self-employment classes, which are really great.
I've gone there before.
Do you, are you, like, you have the technical skills to do what you're talking about? Like the actual, like, the job that you're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay.
Pretty much. It's just
Right.
I want to brush up on some of the stuff that might enhance it even more.
Yeah, let's talk.
Okay.
Well, Dan, I think has.
I was going to just say there's a number of resources at the university as well. There's some self entrepreneurship kind of classes, as well as marketing. You know, those are the 2-year programs. There's some marketing on the 4-year programs, but at the same time, you know, it's probably a lot easier to get forgiveness than permission. So just go. Just go for it.
For example, Jackie Moore does a very, very highly thought of marketing class at the University of Montana. And if you just went and talked to her, she might even let you audit it. I mean, it isn't like it's you want the information. It isn't you need the credits. It's no one you're trying to impress with a degree. It's that you need to have the knowledge. And it sounds like there's several places. The College of Technology has a 2-year program. Jackie Moore runs a great program over at the U of M. You know, adult education may offer some classes in entrepreneurship, as does the U. And it sounds like Voc Rehab might even have services for self-employment.
Thank you.
Yes, Dave.
Yeah, just a quick comment that I'd like to make is that just out of everything that has been said is that on the local, state, and federal levels, the ongoing transformation of the whole system has to happen. And we've come a long ways, but have a long way to go.
And I think as consumers, if you don't ask questions, and you don't get resources, you don't know what you're missing. So if consumers can go to their people and say, you know, I'd like to work, these are my concerns, then there's a lot of resources out there to help you.
Tyler?
One thing that I have noticed is, like when you're applying for a job at any major employer that you're just fine, or even in professional licensing, for instance, get my EMT license, they always ask, do you have a mental or physical impairment that may impact your ability to do this job. And I always say no, of course, but, I mean, I guess especially in professional licensing, if you leave out something, they can take your license later. But if you tell them that you have bipolar disorder and that you've been in the hospital 5 times, they're gonna say, they don't know enough about it about the mental illness to say, oh, well, yeah, but look at all these things, he's, getting the license. So, do you guys offer any services to help people when they're in a situation like that, help them, since you may know the law better as far as their protections, help them get through something like that? Because professional licensing could be anything from plumbing to, you've got to get a license.
I always put on the application, I always put yes, but will explain if interviewed, so I have a chance to meet him face to face and explain my situation.
I think if it doesn't, if you truly believe it doesn't affect you, then you are not required to disclose that illness, which is not necessarily a disability. If it becomes a disability for you, maybe there's a cyclical nature to something, and you can say, I'm having trouble right now, I need to sit down and talk with you about this. I occasionally, if you can truly state that this is not going to, I can perform the essential functions of this job, and have a resume that really is darn right on target that supports that, with references that support that, then if a disability becomes an issue at some point in your life, because you're not always necessarily going to be functioning with a disability, cover yourself with your references and with your resume and all. And so when that does come up, it's not something that they have a leg to stand on. And then you call who?
Disability rights.
I was going to say, Tyler, and it is prohibited for employers to ask you if you have a disability.
Right.
And it is prohibited for employers to ask you what your disability is, even if they can see it. So, when it comes to employment applications, you can just ignore that question. Or you can put not applicable, or whatever you want, but you don't have to answer it. And should they terminate you if they find out you didn't answer it correctly, call Disability Rights Discrimination Unit, which will advise you. But the second issue is a bit more complicated, and that has to do with licensing and certification, particularly in the professions. And there has been a lot of litigation around whether or not professional organizations such as medical, legal, EMT, can ask you whether you have a disability to investigate further whether or not it disqualifies you from the job. And I wished I could tell you that it was as bright a line in professional organizations as it is in employment, but it's not. No employer can ask you if you have a disability or what it is. But the professional licensing organizations, the law is unclear. And what generally we have seen, I think the most recent case that came down, and I don't remember which district it was, but I don't think it was our district, basically said, yes, the professional licensing organization could ask you about mental illness and mental health treatment, but they could not prevent you from being licensed on that basis. They had to make an evaluation as to whether or not you could do the essential function of the job, whether you were qualified. And so I would suggest at this point that you consider that when you go for your professional licensing. And should you admit on your licensing application that yes, you have a mental illness and no, you don't think it interferes with your ability to do the job, and they deny you your license when you pass the tests, then call Disability Rights. Or private, there's a lot of private attorneys who do ADA discrimination as well. We're not the only ones.
Well, and, I think it's really important that as a resource, Disability Rights, we do a lot of employment law, and when you call us, we'll do an intake, and we'll get some facts, then it's referred on to my work group. We are the specialists in that area, so it's quite likely that we'll call you, get some more facts. I just can't think of very many cases where we we don't have everything that we need when we get an intake call like that. So we do a lot of times do a lot more investigation. Sometimes we just can provide you some technical assistance. Sometimes we can give you other resources. But if you have any questions about a question that is on an application of any type, I think it's fair to say that you can call and we'll try and help you.
I just asked because, not because I'm having trouble, by the way, it's because I'm helping teach an EMT class next month, and there are some people that have disabilities that are taking the class, and I know they're gonna ask, so.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of fact specific to the individual too.
And the other thing you need to know about discrimination claims, particularly based on disability, is you have 180 days after the discriminatory event occurs to file a claim with the Human Rights Commission. So do not sit around thinking about it. You have 6 months. It's one of the shorter statutes of limitations. So if you believe you have been discriminated against on the basis of disability, don't wait. Get help, and then you can evaluate whether or not it's worth filing a complaint and pursuing it or not. But it is not one of those claims you can think about and twiddle your thumbs over, because you'll lose it if you do.
You know, I'd like to back up to the point about filling out applications again.
Okay.
Just because I think it's a dead end for folks to be filling out applications. And there's 20 ways to develop jobs without having to do that. And again, you know, one of the places that I would look to start building the social capital is to start using your business power, right? I don't know what the budget of the Western Mental Health Center is, but it's millions, and it turns over those dollars, you know, 6 times in the community or whatever. I would start looking at the supply chain. Do we cook our money in a bank that doesn't hire people with psychiatric disabilities? Do we buy gasoline, food, rent, anything?
Talk to him.
Right? Well, you know, we do this with a lot of boards of directors that we work with. One of the things that we're trying to get at is not strong-arming folks, but being able to pick up the phone and say, listen, I sent all my vans to you last year for repairs, and I spent $100,000 with your business. I've got a young man who'd like to be a mechanic. Do you think you could fit him in? You know, that's the way that business does business. It is, and the other thing that does is that, you know, we've become very used to this idea that the world is managed by HR directors. But most companies in the U.S. don't have job descriptions, and they don't have HR functions. We have 6 offices. We don't have one job description in our offices anywhere. And I don't want to go back to having an HR function. You know, I don't want to manage people. I want to support people. We connect as human beings over shared interests. If I'm repairing your van, chances are I kind of like working on vehicles. If you're going to send me somebody who also likes working on vehicles, now we've got a human connection. Employment is still a human decision, right, that we make. Unless you're IBM or somebody where it's sanitized. You know, most of the jobs are in small business. There's 17 million owner-operator businesses today in the United States. There's 26 million total businesses in the United States. Only 16,000 of them have more than 500 employees. But where do our job developers go? They go to Walmart and Target and all those places where you've got to fill out applications and deal with an HR person. And an HR person doesn't care that you like engines or anything like that. Use the economic power of your organizations to open up your supply chain, right? And to start, you know, just a kindly phone call. Hey, you know, we bought $50,000 in groceries from you last year. I got somebody who'd really like to be a union meat cutter. What do you think? Any chance? Right? So again, it's one of many strategies, but it works.
Great idea.
Okay. Do we have any other questions? Yes?
Well, I hesitate to go into the detail maybe of the background necessary to make it understood, but basically my 19-year-old son with Asperger's and some emotional disturbance has no idea what he's interested in. We tried a little bit of voc rehab testing. He graduated, so he doesn't qualify for voc rehab, even though it was a very insufficient test. And we're in Valley County, so there's limited programs. how do I get him into opportunities where he can try things, find what he's interested in, get some support, maybe, have someone to talk to him on the QT about hygiene is important to jobs, and things like that. Is there that kind of all-encompassing kind of program? Thanks.
I think he needs to go back to voc rehab. I would be curious to know what graduated means and why he wouldn't qualify again.
Well, they sent him to a thrift services place where 2 days a week he worked, or 3 days a week he worked for 2 hours a day, whatever they wanted him to do, and all little old ladies wanted him to do was move boxes from here to there, and they reported back that he did fine. That wasn't a job that, tested that he really would have needed skills and abilities and limitations that were real life tests. And in fact, when we went to the voc rehab place, and I was trying to tell the gentleman that wasn't a real test and I really wanted more, my son got mad at me for interfering and had a meltdown right there in the office. And so the guy said, well, no, we can't work with this.
So what does he do what does he do with his time?
He plays Xbox about 16 hours a day.
He could be an air traffic controller, I guess. No, but not being. I'm only being a little bit facetious, but it's like what are the I had similar struggle with my own son. And what is he doing now? He's programming for doing web programming to pay his way through school.
Well, my son has said he wants to either design games or something, but he has no interest or probably skills about higher education. Pursuing it is pretty much out of his control right now. I'm hoping that he'll catch up with himself and he'll find that. But in the meantime, his SSI, he's on year-by-year hearing kind of determination to make sure he still qualifies. And I suggested he audit classes. I suggested that we go do things, volunteer opportunities together. And I just can't get him motivated or feeling like he actually fits in. That's part of the main problem.
Well, part of the challenge too is to go with your mom is not something that most 19-year-olds are interested in doing. So if there's a way to access services through some other means, he may be more receptive. Not to be Pollyanna about it, but that may be an important factor. As much, as good a mom as you are, most of us don't want our moms taking us to work or whatever. And so
I hear you. His situation, he's maybe more on the maturation level about a 14 or 15-year-old.
Okay.
And he's also a very inaccurate historian. He could not tell anybody his problems. He was pressed to. So I'm trying to go and give him a little push and then step back. And you're right. I know something.
But it's it's a dance. It's really a dance.
And we have 2 counselors that work in the Bitterroot. I'm guessing you saw the Hamilton counselor. But I always think maybe trying a different counselor and seeing if a rapport can be built, that way. So I'll give you some information.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. And also, I guess I was just saying that story too to bring this evidence to your awareness too that the transitioning into adulthood with no clue what you want to do is maybe another factor to consider.
Well, I think one of the big problems that happened with your son, Danelle, and we talked about it, is he did not get transition services when he was in high school. And I think that's what she was talking about he didn't qualify anymore because he graduated. So even though at age 16, he was supposed to be hooked up with voc rehab, he was supposed to be hooked up with a transition plan, he was supposed to be having job trials during high school under IDEA, none of that happened. And so now here he is at 19 years old, out of school with a diploma.
Right.
Absolutely.
Unfortunately,
No transition plan and no transition
it's an
plan.
all too familiar scenario.
Yeah. And
That
so
we know well.
It's not comforting to hear that, but it's true.
Well, and I'd like to give you some clues, and I appreciate hearing what the panel has to say today, and I'll talk with you, Brooke, and and I also know that he is maturing at a delayed rate, so that hopefully that he'll get there too. But support in the meantime will help me too.
So I just want to say for those of you who are parents of children who are not 19, who are still in high school, You need to be, and you have a child with a disability, you need to be insisting that at age 16, that child has transition planning, and that includes having a voc rehab counselor made available to that child, and that work trials be built into the youth IEP. That is your right under IDEA. It's required, it's mandatory, and it's not happening. And as a parent, you need to be asking for those things.
And we do have a VR counselor in Missoula that is just working with transition students. She is going into the high schools, each high school, I think once a week. And so that's one way that we are trying to identify those youth who, so they don't fall through the cracks.
You know, and I think that's one area that in the mental health system, I see a real need for, is to really work with those kids as an early age. There's nothing more powerful than for a young person coming out of high school with a resume. It could be volunteer work, it could be short-term work, it could be anything that can say, I have these skills, I have done this, and I have people who, besides my parents and my teachers, who can say, I can accomplish these tasks. And that is the most powerful thing that will give them a leg up over so many more people. To me, it's such an important role. And adolescents, especially kids with mental health conditions or challenges, work isn't always the focus. Sometimes it is, but a lot of times it isn't because there's so many other factors. What about work and making some money would help those kids maybe narrow the behavioral stuff into, being able to differentiate between one situation and another, and maybe be able to function a little bit better. We all knew how to behave in certain situations, and we could have meltdowns in other situations, and then those are okay. So I would think that kids may be able to discriminate that. Some may not be able to, but I think a large majority of kids with mental health challenges probably could.
In Butte, we are working with the children's program. They are going to work, they are getting a paycheck. And I think it's very, very important to keep those transitional services. Even if we can work on the hygiene issues and that sort of thing, one-on-one with people, and then eventually hook them up. Well, they should be hooked up with voc rehab, but then, if he's got a goal, work towards that goal, but make sure that those supports never stop. We continue to support and clear through that process. But they are working, they are earning a paycheck in Butte, so.
Danelle, I would just like to say, I have a cousin with Asperger's, and he makes his living selling add-ons for people who want to play World of War or War of Worlds. I don't even know what it is. But basically that's how he makes his living, is he sells, I don't know, the little avatars or the little, they made a cookbook from the beasts that you kill in these things. I mean, it really blew me away. And he has Asperger's, he and his wife, and I doubt they ever leave their house. But they do play this game. So hygiene's well, maybe between them. But I mean, the bottom line is because of this passion for this online game, they now make a living.
Awesome, that's why I was hearing Carrie say too, is find your passion and follow it.
Or find a way. I mean, it may not ever make you huge amounts of money, but if it gives you joy at what you do and it makes you some money. Yes, Tom?
I was interacting. The last couple of years, I'm trying to learn how to drum and sing Native American songs. And so I was demonstrating my skills to my family. We had a family meeting, and one of my nephews, great nephews, came up, and he has autism, and I'm not quite sure what kind. But I didn't think he could do anything, but he took my drum and then I'd sing and then he would drum. And I didn't think he could do that, but I guess I understand some individuals can learn a lot of skills, even though they have different issues with relating and stuff like that.
That's my
But anyway, I was proud that anybody can have some kind of skills or do something.
And he probably has a lot more ability too. It's going to take finding the ways for him to express that. Are there any other questions?
Yeah,
Yes,
I
sir.
got one. I've always wondered, it seems like it's hard to get people into services because there's a limited amount of available slots, if you want to call it that. How do you get people out of this system? How do you graduate? How do you say, okay, seems like you're on your own now, let's get you moving? Because I have noted in the past there seems to be a tendency in a number of different service providers, we'll say, to hang on to clients way past the time that they could probably manage on their own. And I'm wondering if you could address that. I see it solving two problems. One, you create openings for people that are coming in. And two, you force some independence on folks that are probably at that point in their life.
Well, I guess I'll start with a stab at answering that one. I think that we need to look at mental health services on a continuum, and I think that there's a point where people may need very minimal supports, but I think that the majority of people who are coming to your community mental health centers need some type of ongoing support. As their illness cycles, as people learn skills, as things happen in life, I think people may need more supports or less supports. But I think that kind of pushing people out of the system to lose their slot is not really helpful either, because I think that even if you have, say, 1 hour of case management a month because you're doing well, you're working, things are going good, there could be something that happens, a life event, or it could just be the cyclical nature of a lot of the mental illnesses. There comes a point back around where that person may need some additional support, and them not having that readily available in the system, I think, does more damage than providing a less amount of services when a person's at that level. So I don't think it's necessarily pushing people out, but it's giving people, matching up the amount of services someone needs with where they're at.
And with Voc Rehab, as CRP providers, we are required to sign a long-term sign-off, which guarantees that those supports stay in place while they have that job. So as long as they have that job, we continue to be involved with them. People can choose to end services at any time. So, but I don't think we should push people out. I don't think that's a good thing to do.
No, I'm glad you don't push people out.
We don't. We've been gone a long time ago.
'Cause I had an episode about 2 months ago that my liver was shut down, and I jumped into the devil's den, and I come out of it, and they helped me come out of it, and I'm still coming out of it, and they still support me, and I can get stronger every day. So these guys are here to support. We are here to support.
We're a family there.
Yeah.
Workers Now is a huge, I've never felt a greater bond than I have there. I walked in there and the director, well, I'm not going to mention any more names than that right now. I just stuck my foot in my mouth, but a few people there has helped me tremendously, far and beyond what they needed to ever do. Far and beyond.
I was just gonna say, and with Voc Rehab, you can always come back in and reapply even after your case has been closed. So if something in your life changes down the road and you need that support, and you don't have ongoing supports through supported employment, anybody can come back in and reapply for services. So I just wanted to, and once we do meet, once somebody has been employed for a period of 90 days or longer, as long as they're stable on the job, at that point, it's discussed, and once decided upon, then the case will be closed at that time. So I just wanted to add that.
I think too, that one of the principles of working with people in employment is to give people as much latitude as they possibly can. And I had a couple of women who came through this past fall who really needed on-the-job supports. And I've never been a rare provider of job coaching over the years, but they really needed that. And we did a pretty, with the employer's request, saying, I can't hire these people without the level of support you could provide. We did some pretty intensive job coaching to help them deal with both the symptoms, but also learning some complexity of the job and becoming more independent, to the point where we faded completely away. We are not providing job coaching. We do consult occasionally with the employer. I check in with their therapist or with their medication clinic provider, whether it's a psychiatrist or nurse practitioner. And they know they can call me. I'll make an occasional call just to say, just checking in to see how you're doing. Oh, I thought you'd be calling about now, you know, and they're fine. They're fine. Now, that may not be the case over time, but I want to keep the door open, but I don't want to be intrusive. And their employer said, oh, I can take care of these problems. We don't have to, you don't have to be involved in this. And so we've, you know, keep pulling back as needed. And they're competitively employed on their own, and nobody would know one way or the other whether they have a disability.
And
But they would have shown it, they showed it off, you know, right off the bat initially, but that cleared up pretty fast.
I was just going to add, there's also post-employment services too. So once your voc rehab case has been closed, if you start having problems on your job, it's really important that you get in contact immediately with your voc rehab counselor and or your employment specialist, so you can start talking about what services could be available to help you maintain that job, or meet and start looking at something else that's going to work maybe better.
Yes, Dan?
Just a quick question. It was brought up earlier, the possibility of voc rehab and the employment programs working together. Now, traditional voc rehab doesn't work really well with people with mental illnesses. Is that correct?
Contraire on, we've had very good relationships in Missoula.
It's the first time I've ever heard that talking a lot of rehab.
It's all about collaboration.
Okay, and that's my question. Because I'm hearing two parallel systems and we're talking about this. If the more, I think, two programs can work together, I think the growth that could happen, people could help grow exponentially. And is there that much work between, I mean, what's going on in Butte and voc rehab? Or, I'm sorry, where are you from? From Missoula?
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah, here in Missoula.
Okay. So you guys
We're
working
lucky
close together?
here, very close.
Okay.
And we're pretty proud, aren't we,
Yeah.
honey?
Good.
Of the relationship that we have. And we have had a lot of successes because we work close together. Not only do we work close together, but we work close together with the case managers, with the therapists, with the psychiatrists. And it is one group, you know, all working together.
I don't have, you know, until I've had two staff working with me, my team's been voc rehab. Now, I think Sarah and Butte, typically the office there isn't as easy to deal with. And they're a different district than Missoula, so her boss's boss is not a Butte, you know, doesn't supervise Butte. But I think that's a much tougher situation, and I'm not envious.
And I think for quite a few years, Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, but Butte has always been the tight wallet community. They don't like to spend their money. So I see that as a real need for, you know, maybe just the area. If Missoula's doing that, maybe Butte should look at that and, you know.
And it could be dealt with at a state level too, you know, with Barb Varnum. You know, it may be an issue that needs to be looked at of how can we collaborate on mutual goals? Because I think that is the key piece, and
You guys might be able to create a model that we can replicate across the state if you've got that relationship going and it's working. And are you able to blend the funding streams all? You voc rehab money help out the employment program on, is it training or anything?
you know, there are challenges with the new Workers Now piece. There are some questions that I've gotten. Well, since you have this funding resource, then maybe we don't need to be doing with this particular person. And there are times when I agree, but a lot of times I don't agree. And the funding from voc rehab is twice what CBR is, community-based rehab is.
Oh, yeah.
So for the short haul, to get things, you know, jump-started, And not to max out voc rehab dollars, I mean, by March, they're dying. There's no money between, you know, April or May, you know, there's no money until the 1st of July, a lot of years. And so we've gotta respect that. But how can we collaborate to make it work? I can't bill CVR and have a job, there's no way. And same with Sarah, she can't bill CVR and have a job. And if the state's moving closer and closer to using that line item instead of case management, and I know that's happening because I can just read it, you're gonna kill the programs. You, not you, you the state. And so we really need that collaboration with voc rehab, but we also need the support of the state saying employment is a function, a case management function. Not job coaching, but employment. Job search, job supports, the clinical piece. And I'm seeing that fading back. I'm seeing a lot of challenges there, and I think people are gonna suffer. I can go find a job someplace. I'm not worried about me, but I'm worried about the clients I'm working with who need not just support, but they need clinical skills as well. And a real balance of that, and a real respect between all those different pieces.
Okay, are there any other questions? Brenda?
I had a follow-up question. Brooke, earlier, it's actually two questions. Earlier, you said that because the long-term employment waiting list is so long, that one thing that you might think about doing is having upfront work adjustment training. So I guess I just didn't quite, I have two questions about it. Was that so that the people who actually could get a job would be able to keep it? Was that kind of what you were thinking?
Definitely.
Okay. Okay, and then secondly, could you do that? Or do you have to have some kind of readjustment or changing of the funding stream? I mean, could your office just decide to do that?
We could.
I think it's a really neat idea. I guess that's why I'm asking.
And we've really been talking about it a lot. And why I mentioned it and brought it up goes back to transition services. Here we have these youth that are eligible for services, but they're going to need those long-term supports. The waiting list is long. We don't want them graduating at the age of 18, nothing to do when they're done. And so we have to shift. We have to start looking at from a different paradigm of what else can we do. Work adjustment training for you folks who've been around a long time in VR used to be used quite a lot, and it's a way to take months of time to pay for somebody to learn and hone job skills, basically. And then voc rehab kind of shifted away from it. But it's still an employment service that it's available. It's just not used.
It
so,
is available.
you know, it is available, but we just don't use it. We've just shifted away from it. We do a lot of
good luck getting it approved.
work assessments. We do a lot of on-the-job training. But it's still there. So, but we're
what's the
talking
age
more about it.
on availability for that?
I
Can you
don't-
use that
there
for
isn't.
16,
not
for
a-
under
it's not-
18?
It's not an age issue.
No.
But
It's
that's
60.
what.
So if you're working with a high school kid and you're working on transition services, can they access this through voc rehab before they graduate?
That's what we're talking about, because we do not want to be putting people on the waiting list for services. And one of the other things that we're looking at doing, that we've been talking about too, is writing past plans to pay for that work adjustment training and that job coaching for employment. So again, we are looking at some creative, options.
I have a question, Brooke. How is what you're talking about different from, what's it called?
A work assessment?
No, not a work assessment. It's, you're not ready to work yet, so we're going to put you through a program to get you ready to work instead of putting you to work. How is this?
Like work readiness?
Yeah, how is this different than work readiness?
The model, best practice is if you want to work, you don't do all this training for work, you get people in a job.
Right.
Yeah, there can be, and so you can get people in maybe a work assessment where people can actually get paid to do the work. And so there's some funding for that, and it's an incentive for employers, or on-the-job training, which is a resource that is often used.
Yeah, we use OJT
Yeah.
for this, based on what person's discovery says, about their vocational themes.
We really don't do a lot of work readiness. And we encourage people to go out and, volunteer you know, and get experience that way if they're not ready. Or utilize other programs that might have funding for work assessments too. The problem with our agency and work assessments is that they're pretty limited. And typically what that means is that we can only authorize 40 to 80 hours for a work assessment. Well, if you think about that, 80 work hours, I mean, broken up even part-time is really only a duration of a month. And so it's frustrating for CRPs, you know, and voc rehab, because that we don't have. In the past, we could do up to 3 months of a work assessment. And so again, I think that's why we need to be looking at the work adjustment training and maybe shifting back that way.
Is that a federal mandate or a Helena mandate, the hours?
You know, I don't want to misspeak, but it would be a Helena.
But I'm still unclear, how is work adjustment different from work readiness?
The name.
I think it's just the term.
So it is work readiness.
It's not, you know, if you're doing classes where you're
it's
teaching
different.
people, you know.
It is different.
The model is not to do like classes and non-work related, I mean, it's work related, but you're not at the job. The model, best practice is, you want to work, let's go find you a job, we'll help you learn the job as you're working in that setting, not spending
And
a
adjusting
whole
to
lot
it.
of time doing prep.
Well, and that's what I'm having difficulty with your recommendation, because to me it sounds like work readiness, which has always been a barrier to work. Everybody goes to work readiness, and if and when they ever graduate from work readiness, then they might go to work. But you're right, best practice is, if people want to work, they go to work. They'll figure out and be trained while they're working what it takes to become ready to do that job. The first job I got, I hadn't a clue how to do it. I was hired right out of college to be an eligibility worker. Well, what the heck does college teach you about being an eligibility worker? Nothing. I could add and subtract, I could count, I could figure out scales, but that's it. Everything about that job I had to be taught on the job. And they expected that. They gave you a 6-month probation period to teach you about the job, to see if you can figure out the job in 6 months, and if they can train you in 6 months. And so for work readiness, I know you're talking about more basic things, like getting there on time and wearing the correct clothes and stuff like that, being clean. But it's kind of the same idea, I think. I think that really, if you...
Voc rehab, though, to be ready for voc rehab, you have to be ready and able to work. Voc rehab is not going to pay for you to, I'm trying not to be so, try to be more explain it better, and I'm not doing a very good job. But you have to be ready and able to work to move forward through the voc rehab process. And that's where work adjustment training would come in, because we would be then looking for jobs, like Connie was explaining, where a person would work in a job, on a job or in a job setting for a significant period of time to learn skills. Work readiness would be learning skills like how to write a resume, maybe some interviewing skills. Now, here again, those are things that voc rehab can sometimes help with as well. And we do have, so complicated.
Well, but Brooke, let me-
It is complicated, but we do have job readiness training, which is a short-term option that's also available.
But
Maybe we can clear, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Isn't it fair to say though, Brooke, that the work adjustment goals are not all that different from, say, working in support employment? The initial goals is to get, it's more intensive involvement. The employer has a little bit of a break because, you know, if in support employment, this person is paid right away, but the job coach is right there making sure that as the person learns that the job also gets done. Work adjustment, maybe the employer isn't paying the full amount of the money up front, is at least how it used to be run. Yeah, paying for it. So the employer gets a break in that sense as the person learns, yada, yada, yada. It's an interesting concept to go back to that, because support employment really kind of put work adjustment off the table quite a bit, you know, when it came about, you know, 20 years ago.
And it gets confusing because the terms are always, you know, switching around in the state.
We have a few more questions.
Yeah, I was wondering, if you go to school, you get passed through from what, passed on to the next class, and you go and graduate. You don't actually have a diploma, but would it be easier for them to get a job through the voc rehab than going out on their own?
My response to that would be, it would be individualized, you know, based on what you're interested in doing and wanting to do. And so the best thing to do would be to just go in and talk with a voc rehab counselor about your situation and go from there.
And Dave, did you have a question?
Oh, I think that, you know, like with the Adult Mental Health Center collaborating with Voc Rehab has funded the job placement and everything that I had. Then when Voc Rehab closes the books, it's important to have the continuum of the support from the Adult Mental Health Center, because for me, in the past, that's been a relapse trigger. You know, and then why invest all the time and energy into getting me employed, then when 3 months later the case is closed, then I'm out using or drinking, and then I lose the job and all the effort and credibility's gone. So I think that the collaboration between Voc Rehab and River House is definitely. I've been lucky enough to have that going with me since I worked at Montana Pipe Company about almost 20 years ago. It has been very important.
And to your credit, you've worked consistently through that time at different places, because they keep closing.
And Brendan, you had another question?
Oh, it was a little bit more of a comment, and I'm so encouraged by all the people that have spoken about how I think that I work at the court system, and I think we need to kind of buckle down and work a little harder to understand the systems that you have. But what I liked about there seems to be some confusion about this work adjustment thing. We have in our court a consistent number, small number of, I call them kids, they're 20 to 21, they're somewhat similar to what Danelle was talking about. They didn't get transferred. I don't know why. Not just even by vocational rehabilitation, they didn't get transferred by Medicaid either. And so they get into trouble, blah, 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 they arrive. I'm thinking of a particular person right now, he's 20 years old, he's never had a job. We're gonna get his Medicaid back. He tried, but he apparently was calling his old worker, who is like in the youth side, you know, anyway. And so one of the things that I think that harkens back to what you said earlier is, some of the kids, they have no hope. They don't have anybody who's saying to them, wait a minute, you know, and so what I liked about your thing is like early entry, whatever you do with people. When they come in, if you can't put them on the long-term waiting list, I mean, if instead of or in addition to, if you brought people in and said, even though I'm hearing what you're saying, Carrie, about, you know, discovery and, you know, find a place, but in the short run, giving them some hope that like, okay, this is what you need to do. You need to look good, you need to clean up, and don't do this, this, and this, or do this, this, and this in your interview. I think that would be so encouraging for some kids who are slowly working through these endless waiting lists for all the services that you get.
Totally.
So anyway, that's what I liked about it.
And for those of you, maybe for the next WSAA meeting, I will come with clarification of the difference. So I will have some more.
Thank you.
Very much, yeah.
Do we have other questions? I'm going to put the panel on the spot because I like doing that. No.
Will you prosecute?
I think so. Actually, I'm tapping into your wisdom. If you had one thing you would suggest to make a change in the way things are done now, to increase employment for people with disabilities, people with mental illness, what would it be? What one thing would you suggest? Would you like to start?
Teamwork
Teamwork. Between whom?
between all of us.
All right, teamwork between all of you.
One-on-one training.
One-on-one training.
I think one of the things that I see, and Connie touched on it before, is the mental health system anyway is going to the community-based rehab and support. And I think that reimbursement rate needs to go up so we can provide clients with the ongoing long-term services they need.
So fund the community rehab and support. Dan?
I think along the lines of, continually put people in charge of their own lives, including work.
Sarah?
Just one thing?
Just one thing.
Be to work on time.
Collaboration between agencies.
So in your case, between which agencies?
Corrections, voc rehab, everybody working together to promote recovery, in whatever shape or form that is,
Okay.
in
So
the person's eyes.
I'd like to see the mental health service plan focus on recovery efforts, really fund people who are wanting assistance in finding work. And putting that as a priority, because the model, the evidence-based model at the Village in Long Beach, California, which is sort of the parent program, it is a star program in the country, and Sarah's been there, I've been there, and we've modeled what we're doing after them. They put work on the same continuum in terms of people being able to improve their mental health. Work is on the same continuum as medication and all other services. That your biochemistry can be improved through work as well as through that. So if we can prevent people from falling down that black hole and give them a chance to not even have to enter half the systems, that we have, perhaps we would be able to save the state a huge amount of money, to say nothing of the grief that people have to go through.
Brooke? I'm going to say thinking outside the box. And I think that that's so important, that when you run into a roadblock, that you ensure that you have absolutely explored every possible option that could be available.
I'd like to see people stay in the community to receive their stabilization and their supports. I think they lose too much ground when they have to go to the state hospital. They lose their homes, they lose their jobs, they lose their family connection, their support connection. So I'd like to see that more stable in their community.
Geez, I'm last.
Oh, again.
I started and I'm ending. Good. I saw Mother Teresa speak about 25 years ago or something, and somebody in the audience said, how do you get out of bed in the morning? I mean, the idea that world hunger is so oppressive, why don't you just lay in bed all day and cry? Because you'll never solve world hunger. And she said, every morning I get up and I say, I got to feed one person lunch today. One person at a time is the way this works.
Okay. Well, I want to thank the panel for your time and your thoughtful responses, and I think we can give you a